across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome to Morning Glory. It's 2 minutes past 6. I'm Mike Graham, and we are here, and we are fit to be tied, ladies and gentlemen. I don't mean that in any kind of wrong sense. I want you to think about that and wonder what it is that I mean. Well, I'll tell you what I mean. Keir Starmer is at it again. He's all over the front pages this morning. You might have seen coverage of it yesterday. He basically got up to try and relaunch the NHS. Privatising it, by the way. I don't know where all those people are who used to say, the Tories want to privatise the NHS and sell it all off. Well, Keir Starmer's apparently privatising it, selling it all off. Nobody seems to care. Strange that. But instead, of course, of making that the main plank of his argument yesterday morning when he made a speech at some medical centre in London, instead he decided to smear the entire nation. He decided to smear the people who have been raped and attacked by Asian, Pakistani grooming gangs, raping gangs. He decided to smear the people who are politicians trying to ask for a public inquiry. He decided to smear Maggie Oliver, the person who uncovered an awful lot of this ghastly behaviour when it was happening 20 years ago. He decided to smear all journalists. He decided to smear Elon Musk. He decided to smear every single individual who wants a proper inquiry into what happened, when it happened, why it was covered up by Labour, why it was covered up by councillors, why people were allowed to continue to sodomise and rape young children with absolute and utter impunity, while never ever being worried about being charged with any offence by the police, who also didn't care a jot about what was going on. Starmer's far-right smear, it says on the front page of the Daily Mail. It says it on the front page of the Telegraph as well. This man cannot get anything right. All he does is continually attack and impugn ordinary British people who care about what is happening to their own country at the hands of some ghastly imports from Pakistan. It's quite simple, ladies and gentlemen. Keir Starmer is not fit for purpose. He's not fit to be Prime Minister of this country. And quite frankly, for him to continue to say that anyone who wants to protect the lives and the bodies of young girls aged 12, 13, 14, sometimes even 9 and 8 years old is far right, is absolutely and utterly disgusting. And I, for one, would like to see Keir Starmer sitting right in front of me here to answer some questions on your behalf. 0344 499 1000 is the number. Of course, we've got lots else to talk about as well, including what happened yesterday when there was a debate in Parliament about whether there should be a new election. We'll be talking to this man later on, Conservative MP for the Scottish Borders, John Lamont. Here's what he has to say.
Labour promised not to increase national insurance. Broken. Labour promised not to raise taxes on farmers. Broken. Labour promised not to scrap the winter fuel payment. Broken. Labour promised to compensate WASPy women. Broken. Labour promised to protect single-sex spaces. Broken.
All those promises broken by Labour. All those promises that were made just before they got in July. 6 months later, all completely and utterly meaningless. This man Starmer is betraying his nation. He's betraying the people that voted for him, and he's even betraying the Labour Party, to be honest, and I think it's time for him to go. 0344 499 1000. Meanwhile, on the front page of the Daily Telegraph and a few of the other papers, tearful Trudeau bows out. We gave you a bit of a taster of that yesterday. Justin Trudeau has decided to step down and resign from his job as running Canada. Just before that, Donald Trump said, Canada's in such a bad way, might as well make it 51st state of America. That's quite funny. Meanwhile, over on the weather front, there's some bad flooding going on. If you're stuck in that or if you're affected by it, by all means get in touch with us. There's some bad snow coming still down the pike in the next couple of days. And meanwhile, the train services in Liverpool were cancelled. Avanti West Coast did not run trains between Liverpool and London for several hours on Sunday morning. Because why? Because as left train drivers were told they didn't need to walk on snowy ground. Because there was snow on the ground, they didn't walk to the train, they didn't drive the train didn't go anywhere. If you'd paid your money and taken your chance, you wouldn't have been able to travel anywhere at all. Absolutely incredible. Meanwhile, Prince Andrew's been going around using a fake name. I don't know why, but there's something smelly about it. We'll be finding out what that's all about as well. 0344 499 1000. This is the home of common sense. It's the year of common sense, and just to prove it to you, even more great news, Nicolas Sarkozy is apparently facing 10 years in jail. It's brilliant. Absolutely incredible. We'll tell you all about that as well. This is Morning Glory. Let's get it on. Welcome to Morning Glory. Now, as if you didn't need any more encouragement to wake up and smell the roses and have some coffee and get yourself going, Peter Blexley is here to share with me the home of common sense and the great looking forward that we're about to do, Peter, over the next 4 hours, of why this is the home of common sense and why Keir Starmer is an absolute utter disgrace.
Good morning, Governor. Thank you for having me, because according to the Prime Minister of this once great nation,
yes,
I am clearly a far-right bandwagon jumper.
Of course you are.
Because for many, many years, I've held deep concerns about these grooming rape gangs that have caused incredible harm and damage to young children.
To thousands of young children.
Children whose lives will be blighted forever. Some lives have been lost as a result of this action. Let's please remember that at all times. and because I harbour deep concerns, like so many other millions of people in this country, that makes me, according to Starmer, a far-right bandwagon jumper. And what an insult.
It really is. And what a telling situation yesterday when I watched his appearance yesterday while he was supposedly going to be announcing these, sort of revolutionary new manoeuvres for the NHS and how they're going to get rid of a load of wasteful appointments and they're going to get people seen quicker and they're going to get people fixed up quicker, none of which is basically going to happen at all. But he instead got caught in the weeds of this kind of obsession of his that anyone who criticises anybody from what we might call another culture, particularly a Muslim culture, is somehow a maniacal Nazi. I mean, he might as well have said that.
Well, let's remember what lies at the very heart of all this outrageous behaviour that was allowed to continue for so long, that created so many victims, so much harm, so much damage to hundreds upon hundreds of families, not only the children, but the families and their communities, was cowardice. Absolute cowardice lies at the very root of all this. And that cowardice was on behalf of people working in social services, social workers and the such like, people working in the police service, wheresoever that may be. And of course, we know that there are at least 50 towns affected by this appalling behaviour. Cowardice for people because they wouldn't stand up and confront this criminality for fear of being called racist. What a nonsense.
Absolutely.
Because you see, those who occupy the corridors of power, whether it be in policing or in local authorities or in amongst so many political parties, would have you believe the lie which says all of us, the entire nation, live harmoniously in a wonderful multicultural nirvana. And for millions of people, particularly in cities and suburbs, that is simply not true.
No. And it never will be. Let's have a look at what Starmer actually said yesterday. I mean, you might have to sort of do a double take and see if you can actually believe your ears and your eyes as you watch this. But have a look.
And when politicians, and I mean politicians, who sat in government for many years, are casual about honesty, decency, truth and the rule of law, calling for inquiries because they want to jump on a bandwagon of the far right, then that affects politics because a robust debate can only be based on the true facts.
Well, the true facts are that the last report that was done, the last inquiry that was instituted and reported back in 2022, did not have any of the facts at its command that we now have. And it didn't look into the main problem whatsoever. The word Pakistani was mentioned once in a 400-page report. I think Telford was mentioned once in the report. Rotherham was mentioned once in the report. The whole report was not at all a proper investigation of what happened nationally, because what we now know is far more interesting and far more revealing than anything that was ever in that report. So the idea that we rest on that report and we make the recommendations that that report recommended is nonsense.
Alexis Jay's report was into child sexual abuse per se as an overall kind of thing.
Right.
So it ranged from something that a stepfather might do when he inveigles his way into a family because he wants access to children. So that kind of paedophile, to something that somebody working for the clergy might do, to something ranging to what a teacher might do, for example.
Or somebody at the BBC, perhaps.
Indeed. Right. As opposed to a thorough forensic, deep probe into
looking under the bonnet effectively of what was going on.
Gangs did of men who were overwhelmingly of Pakistani origin, Muslim rape gangs, and what they did throughout the country, the length and breadth, wheresoever they operated. That was not the report that we were presented with.
No, of course not.
Not at all. And that is what is needed. So when people say we need a full public judge-led inquiry, perhaps, that has the power to compel people to turn up and give evidence, They are not bandwagon jumpers.
No.
They are deeply concerned members of the public who want the truth to be told.
Exactly right. And he's basically had a go at everybody, from Elon Musk, who he says is a dangerous, poisonous individual, to Maggie Oliver, who is a genuinely former Manchester police officer.
Friend of mine.
Well, a friend of mine as well. She's going to be on the show later on today, basically saying that she's a bandwagon jumper. She's absolutely outraged by what he said. He said that basically Kemi Badenoch is looking for attention. I mean, how dare he talk about the children of this country who he had a responsibility for when he was Director of Public Prosecutions. He says that he had a few people prosecuted. He says that it was down to him that any of them actually ever faced any kind of trials at all. But incorrect, I'm afraid, Sir Keir Starmer, because he's also admitted in the past that he didn't do enough and that he let people down, because he did.
When Maggie Oliver joined Greater Manchester Police, she had a bit of life experience behind her. I think, and Maggie will correct me, but I think she was in her early 40s.
Yeah.
So you would think in this modern age, somebody that policing would embrace because of her life experiences, bringing that into policing. And Maggie fairly soon identified, having served for some years, she then went into specialisation of child sex abuse investigations, and she identified this appalling gang rape behaviour by these Pakistani Muslim men.
Yeah.
And she flagged it up to the very highest level that she could within Greater Manchester Police. In other words, the Chief Constable. Maggie then had a tragedy in her life, and she stepped back from policing for a short while and then returned. And when she returned, the promises she had been given that action would be taken, arrests would be made, were all turned out to be entirely false.
Yes.
And Maggie, in order to be able to tell the world the truth, courageously resigned from her job without a thought about what she was going to do for a living, without a thought about her own personal financial situation. She went, no, I'm going to be principled, I'm going to tell the truth. And for Starmer to try and badmouth a national hero like Maggie Oliver tells me everything I need to know about that man who lives in number 10.
Exactly right. He's written a piece for The Sun today, which opens with this line: "There is no crime more vile than child abuse. The way that grooming gangs, many of them Asian..." What do you mean, many of them Asian? How about you call it as it is? They're Pakistani grooming gangs, men who have come from a particular part of Pakistan to prey on our children. He says they've preyed on vulnerable girls in some of our poorest communities is sickening. He says, basically, that my fight to change the way that the prosecution service operated is a matter of public record, making sure the men responsible for these despicable acts were brought to justice. Well, some of them were, but an awful lot of them were not. You know, we talked to Samantha Smith, who's another victim, just at the end of last week. The people who abused her for year upon year upon year when she was as young as 9 years of age have never faced justice. Not one of them has ever been before a court, right? So for Keir Starmer to say that he brought these prosecutions and sorted it all out is a complete and utter nonsense. He says far-right voices have tried to rewrite history. Ludicrous claims that Safeguarding Minister Jess Phillips and I are part of the problem, not the solution. He says, in truth, Jess has spent her entire life battling to keep women and girls safe. Well, really? Well, she's not doing it now because she's refusing to have an inquiry.
The National Crime Agency currently have an operation ongoing into trying to secure further arrests and convictions for exactly these sorts of crimes.
Because they're still going on.
It's 2025, Starmer.
Right.
Wake up, listen, and see if you can actually develop a better relationship with the truth.
Yes, he's got very thin skin. He doesn't like it. And have a look at how Labour actually operates and how they react when somebody from the opposite side of the divide politically has a go at them. This is Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp yesterday in the Houses of Parliament.
It is not far right to stand up for victims of mass rape. And smearing people.
Order.
It's those concerns.
Shadows. People want to hear the statement. Chris Phil.
Smearing people who raise those issues is exactly how this ended up getting covered up in the first place.
So there you have the Labour benches jeering at Chris Philp as he says it's not far right to be concerned about these issues, and raising these issues is not a far right episode. They all think that's ridiculous and they think it's funny, and that's why we are where we are.
If this country, and when I say this country, please forgive me, viewers and listeners, I know you've got far more common sense than many of those politicians we've just watched behaving appallingly. But if these politicians, if the establishment continues to fail to listen to the public mood, to grasp the concerns that people have, then, and I'm not condoning or justifying in any way, shape or form, but the riots, the disturbances that we had of last summer, those kind of things will, sadly, be repeated.
They will.
Because there are certain people who will take to the streets and commit crime. I wish they wouldn't. But there are certain people who, when their dissatisfaction within boils over, that they can't control it anymore because they think lies are being told, the truth is being suppressed. That's what people get really irritated about, the truth being suppressed. Then certain elements of society, criminal elements, will take to the streets and more disturbances will happen.
And Keir Starmer doesn't seem to grasp the fact that not only is he now the most unpopular Prime Minister that there has ever been in this country, but that almost everything he says is completely and utterly disregarded by the people of this country, because they don't believe a word he says. They don't think he's fit for the job. They don't think he understands what Britain is all about. And what they see is a man who would rather smear you for being far right than help you to prosecute people who are doing terrible, ghastly, evil, awful things to young girls. Even now, even today, even right now, probably at 6:20 in the morning, there will be somebody in one of these ghastly towns up north where this is going on, and nobody's stopping it. No one is stopping it. It's 6:20. I'm Mike Graham. Peter Blexley's here. We'll have more coming up after this.
Out of hospital and treat them in the community where that's appropriate, getting rid of some of the pointless outpatient appointments that people don't need. So there are a wide range of reforms we're putting in place, as well as the investment to deliver the shorter waiting times and higher patient satisfaction that we had under the last Labour government that's been squandered in the last 14 years.
Now, you mentioned about the offering patients more choice. I believe that they could be offered anything up to 5 hospitals to choose from. How feasible is that?
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. I'm Mike Graham. This, of course, is the home of common sense, and this is going to be the year of common sense. Justin Trudeau stepped down yesterday, as we predicted, which has got to be a great start to the new year for Canada and for the Western world. Yet another one of these woke leaders who has fallen by the wayside. Think of Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand. Think of Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland. Think of course, the Emmanuel Macron in France, whose power he's clinging on to, but not for much longer. Let's get a voice note from James.
Good morning, Mike. Just regarding Wish You Were Here, two-tier, free-gear care. This bloke is so far from reality, it's unbelievable. I mean, that speech he came out with yesterday, saying that apparently it's far right if you're concerned about those poor children raped by those Pakistani gangs. As this bloke is an absolute plonker. It won't be too long before he goes on one of his free holidays or trips or whatever he's doing. Far right fuckery. Get lost, Starmer. Have a great show, Mike.
James, very well said. Yeah, I mean, he's been here for, what, nearly a week. Surely it's time for him to go away again. And he's just come back from his tobogganing holiday in Madeira. He's only been back, what, 4 days, I think, so we'll see. Presumably he'll be heading off somewhere very, very soon. Let's not forget as well, he's been having a go at Elon Musk massively. An awful lot of time we spent yesterday here on this very show talking about Elon Musk and his relationship with reform, his relationship with Nigel Farage. We said, I think, without any fear or favour, that Nigel Farage had done exactly the right thing by not rising to Elon Musk's challenge that he should be replaced as the leader of reform. And, of course, sure enough, as we predicted, and as Richard Tice said, they seem to have made it all up again, because back at 5:30 yesterday afternoon, Nigel Farage put out a message in which it said, Keir Starmer is sweeping the failures of the establishment under the carpet. Nothing less than a full national inquiry into the rape gangs will do. To which Elon Musk said, yes, retweeted it. As if he was now in full support of Nigel Farage. So, you know, all of you lefties who got very, very worked up and excited because there was some kind of rift between reform and Elon Musk, have managed to get that completely and utterly wrong as well. Got it all round your ears, haven't you? The Daily Mirror this morning, doing their master's bidding with Keir Starmer, say, outrage at billionaires' grooming gang smears. Prime Minister warns far-right lies are putting people in danger. And they've got a big picture of Elon Musk with the words poison as the headline. Well, I think the poison, ladies and gentlemen, is not coming from Elon Musk. The poison is coming, I think you'd find, from the Pakistani grooming rape gangs who are killing, murdering, raping and torturing young girls of the age of about 12 and 13 in this country. That's where the real poison is. Nothing to do with far right. Thank you very much indeed. Peter Blexley's here with me. Peter, we'll move on from that. Let's talk about Keir Starmer's proper sort of political launch yesterday, relaunch. He was attempting to say that he's going to fix the NHS. Apparently, he's going to do away with a load of needless appointments in order to create some more needless appointments. But on the front page of the Daily Telegraph today, we've got obese patients and smokers face being sent to the back of the queue because under government plans, if you want to give up smoking, or if you want an operation because of some kind of smoking problem that you've got, you're going to be urged to quit smoking first before they give you the operation. And if you're a bit too fat, they won't give you any knee surgery or hip surgery until you've lost some weight.
Well, if there's any overweight smokers listening or watching this morning, I'll meet you at the back of the queue. Because
that's where you're going to be.
Because that's where I'll be.
Meanwhile, yesterday, now, I apologise in advance for this, it's a bit unkind, but there was a load of nurses and doctors surrounding Keir Starmer when he made this announcement yesterday. One of them, unfortunately, didn't seem to be quite sure that she was on film, because here's what she's ended up doing during the entire scenario. You might not be able to hear this if you're listening on the radio, but basically this is a woman who's standing behind Starmer, decides that she might decide to sort of rub her nose there with a tissue, but she's not quite sure whether she's got the bogey out, so she's sticking it up there. She then takes the tissue, rubs it a bit more. She then realises that Starmer's talking, so she'll stick her thumb up there, see if she can get anything out. No, still hasn't got it. Wipe it away. No, she's put it in her mouth. Oh, my God. Goodness me. It's not a great look, that, is it? I mean, if you're standing behind the Prime Minister's shoulder, I would advise you not to pick your nose.
There's a time and a place for picking your nose.
There is.
In fact, I think I did that.
Best if you do it on your own.
Exactly.
Not on a public transportation device.
In your bathroom, preferably.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? with a tissue and a bin or the loo to hand to dispose of said piece of tissue.
Yes.
Now, back in the day, whenever I used to see people picking their nose, say, for example, in our CID office, right, something which I found particularly antisocial,
it is.
I would say, pick us a winner, mate.
Yes.
Or something like that.
And that would hopefully shame them into not doing it.
Yes.
Of course, now if you did that, that would be called some kind of microaggression. You'd probably be facing an HR inquiry as to what you meant by that.
Final written warning or the sack? What do you reckon?
Definitely. Absolutely right. Speaking of which, let's look at the train drivers this morning, because on the front page of the Daily Telegraph, they've got a great story. Avanti West Coast, you might remember, are the company that don't really run trains very often. They're more often on strike than they are actually working. They were on strike on New Year's Eve, and they were on strike on January the 2nd, and of course most of them don't work on January the 1st, so there was a 3-day jolly for these guys, right?
Yeah.
Apparently trains were cancelled, however, on Sunday morning, which would have been what, I suppose, what date was that? Would that have been the 5th?
Oh, the 5th,
It didn't run for several hours on Sunday morning. This was the first Sunday, by the way, of the year where they're not on strike, because every other Sunday from now on until May, they are on strike.
Yeah.
Apparently, Avanti West Coast services between Liverpool and London did not run for several hours because members of the ASLEF trade union refused to walk to the train. And why? Because there was a bit of snow on the ground.
2 inches.
Yeah.
2 whole inches
Unbelievable.
of snow. And nobody had cleared a path for these very well-paid train drivers. Now, I would imagine if you drive a train, you wear some fairly sturdy, sensible footwear.
Sensible footwear, yes.
Yeah, I wouldn't imagine...
You're not wearing stilettos, are you?
I don't think so.
Unless you're particularly into that sort of thing. I don't know what ASLEF train drivers are like.
I can't help but think train drivers probably don't wear stilettos.
Right.
As they're steering hundreds of tons of steel, and hundreds.
And
of
they're always telling me on Twitter how hard the job is, by the way, to drive a train. They say it's almost as hard as being, a brain surgeon, by the sounds of that. What they tell me.
Yeah. So there you go. So bearing in mind that I would imagine sensible footwear is a prerequisite of driving a train, you might imagine that such sensible footwear would be able to negotiate 2 inches of snow.
Yes.
But
according to health and safety representatives from ASLEF, they said to drivers that they shouldn't turn up at the railway depot until the snow was cleared because the site was unsafe to walk around.
Oh, we don't drive trains. I'm part of the union. We don't drive trains. I'm part of the union.
This is what the statement actually said. Edge Hill Depot was not gritted last night. All walkways covered in snow or ice, and therefore no trains are able to leave as there's no safe walking routes for drivers. And as their spokesman said, the walkways were covered in snow and ice, making them unusable. Once they had been cleared, the drivers could access their trains and did so. This is basic safety stuff. I mean, what would be wrong, for example, with somebody from ASLEF going to the local co-op where there was also no walkway cleared for them, where they could buy a couple of packets of Marlboros, some salt, which they could chuck down ahead of them, spraying it as they walk so that the ice would melt in front of their very eyes, and then they could get on the train.
You see, this is the home of common sense.
Yeah.
Which is why that kind of thinking will never catch on with trade unions such as ASLEF.
Yeah. Do you think they managed to drive to the place where they were supposed to walk then from?
Now, you see, Edge Hill is in Liverpool, isn't it?
Yeah.
You see? Right, a proud city.
Very proud.
With a great history of
striking.
Trade, docks, the dockers.
Yeah.
Remember those dockers turning out in all conditions to unload the ships, to feed the nation, to play such a rich part in Liverpool's heritage.
Yeah.
I wonder what those dockside workers of yesteryear would think about train drivers who can't walk across 2 inches of snow.
Do you think it's anything to do with the fact that it was a Sunday?
I wonder.
Yeah. They don't like working Sundays because it's their day off, you see, so they only get £600 extra for driving on a Sunday, and apparently it's not enough.
600 quid for a day's work.
Yeah. It's not enough.
No.
You're right. I mean, especially if you're going to run the risk of slipping on the ice.
I think I've been in the wrong jobs all my life.
Yeah, I think so. Me too. Unbelievable. Absolutely incredible. It's 6:33. Peter Blexley is here. Coming up, we're going to find out why Prince Andrew's been using a fake name. Nobody knows why. Why would you? I mean, it's not like he's not recognisable, really, is it? Sorry, is that another table for 4? Prince Andrew, that's not my name. This is in the Pizza Express, presumably, over in where was it? Wokingham, yeah, or something like that.
Something like that,
yeah. I don't know why he's using a fake name, but we'll find out what that's all about. Also, we'll be talking about Tulip Siddiq, who's the woman who is the anti-corruption minister, who's been looking at flats all over London that have been provided to her by members of a very corrupt family who used to run Bangladesh. She's apparently reported herself to the parliamentary watchdog, just in case she's done anything wrong. She's not sure. We can tell her, though, you have done something wrong, darling. Sorry, this is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
There we go. Welcome back. This is, of course, Morning Glory. I'm Mike Graham. Peter Blexley is here with me. We've got plenty to do. We've got loads and loads of great messages coming in as well. Let's get a voice note from Sue on a national inquiry.
Hi, Mike. This is Sue. I don't think Labour want... they obviously don't want a independent investigation. I think because this runs really deep, I think it will implicate a lot of people in positions of power, Labour MPs, Labour councillors, people working for Labour-run councils in positions of power with access to vulnerable people. I think that's why Labour don't want it.
I think that's probably very true. Got this from Sarah near Plymouth, who says, I hope British people such as these poor women and girls abused by Pakistani rape gangs claim asylum in a safer, more respectful country. Now, there's an interesting point. Let's talk, speaking of other safer and more respectable countries, let's talk about Bangladesh, shall we? Tulip Siddiq has apparently referred herself to a watchdog over use of flats linked to her despotic family, who used to run Bangladesh in what can only be described as a rather corrupt manner.
Yeah, Tulip Siddiq's aunt, Sheikh Hasina, was an authoritarian former leader of Bangladesh.
Indeed.
You got any aunts that are authoritarian leaders?
I haven't got any like that, no. I had an aunt once that lived in Long Island in New York, and I was very disturbed to find out that she didn't live in the rich part of Long Island, she lived in the quite poor part of it.
Did she massacre any of her political opponents?
No, she didn't.
Because it's alleged that...
She didn't buy any flats in London either.
No, right. Well, here we go. Flats, you see. So Tulip... Siddiq and her aunt. There's been a dispute running for some time about how Tulip Siddiq came to own a flat in London.
Yes.
You see. And at some point, she told the Mail on Sunday that the flat wasn't a gift, but that her parents had bought it for her.
Okay.
Right? You know. I mean, because...
That's not a gift, then?
No, but of course not. And it's easy to confuse, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, if somebody buys something.
So when your parents buy something for you and they give it to you, that's not a gift?
I mean, their parents just buying it for you,
okay,
clearly.
Right.
I mean, come on. Your parents bought you loads of flats, didn't they? You know, don't they all? Anyway, she said that she's not deliberately misled, but her understanding of how she gained this property has changed.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, now, let me think. Now, the house that my wife and I own and live in, we're clear about how we own it.
How did you get that, then?
There's never been... Well, we went to an estate agent years ago.
Yes.
Said, can we go and look at that house?
Yeah.
Went and viewed it.
Right.
Liked it. Made an offer on it, which was accepted.
Right. Applied for a mortgage.
Put down a deposit.
Yeah.
Got a mortgage.
Right.
Worked very hard and paid that mortgage off not so long ago.
Okay.
That's how we gained our property. We've never been confused about how we gained that property.
No.
So I'm very concerned that members of Parliament, ministers, can be confused about how they gain properties. I just hope that somebody lives long enough to oversee her dealings, her affairs, when perhaps the property is sold, for example. You know, capital gains tax.
Yes.
Is she going to pay any of that?
They don't like that in the Labour Party, do they? Angela Rayner didn't fancy doing any of that
It's a media job to keep very close tabs on people like this.
Right.
Because I smell a rat.
Yes, I smell several rats. She says, I am clear that I have done nothing wrong. Right?
Yeah.
She's the... anti-corruption minister, by the way.
Yeah.
She says, however, for the avoidance of doubt, I would like you to independently establish the facts about these matters. Because I always do that. You know, when I get home sometimes at the end of the day, I can't exactly remember how everything worked out and how it all happened. So what I do is I ring up an independent individual and ask them to examine what it is that I've just done to make sure I haven't done anything wrong. Because I can never be sure.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I've done nothing wrong, but I always phone a friend to say, could you just check out whether I've done anything wrong?
Like you, I'm always reporting myself.
Yeah.
to the Independent Committee of Blexley Behaviour.
Yeah, exactly right.
To see whether I've misbehaved or not.
Mrs. Blexley can have a view on some of that. She can help you out with that.
She presides over all such
Now,
matters.
here's an interesting wrinkle to this, of course, because old Sir Keir, three-gear, two-tier, never-hear Starmer, guess what? He went on a trip to Bangladesh in 2016, courtesy of a group strongly associated with Tulip Siddiq. And in fact, he was pictured meeting the woman in question, Ms. Hasina, you know, the serial killer of some of her own people. He met her in Bangladesh, and in 2022, he was also pictured meeting her in London once he had become leader of the opposition. Yeah. So he's got a bit of history with old Tulip Siddiq's auntie, who used to run a very authoritarian nation in Bangladesh.
Yeah.
I wonder whether there's any connection to this problem and his friendship with his former leader.
Should we launch an inquiry?
I think we should.
Shall we?
I'm pretty sure he's done nothing wrong.
No.
But for the avoidance of doubt, let's just refer it to somebody who knows better than we do.
Well, I'll contact number 10's press office this morning, and hopefully they'll tell me that he's already referred himself to the independent office of dodgy Bangladeshi contacts.
Meanwhile, Labour are constantly blaming foreign interference in the running of this country. They're saying, blimey, that Elon Musk, he's a right wrong one, isn't he?
Yeah.
We've got a Labour MP, Yasmin Qureshi, apparently saying foreign interference is to be blamed for a petition signed by 3 million people demanding a fresh general election. And that, of course, was a debate that was held yesterday in Parliament, where, once again, the Labour Party didn't bother showing up.
They do throw their toys out of the pram.
They're not happy, are they?
Over such minor, inconsequential things. If you were running the country, imagine, would you be bothered by such lightweight tittle-tattle?
No.
Would you actually get your knickers in a twist?
No.
Over the fact that some bloke who runs a boozer has started a petition online, which I think is hysterical and fair play.
And he had to apologise. This MP had to apologise to the bloke who started the petition, since he's not actually a foreigner. He actually lives here.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And they get themselves in such a tiz over such minor things. Meanwhile, the roads are crumbling. They're full of potholes.
The railways aren't running because there's too much snow.
2 inches of snow. There's millions of people on completely unacceptable waiting lists on the NHS.
Yes.
There's no, guess what, growth in the economy.
There isn't.
Which Labour have promised us. We quite possibly are heading for a recession.
Yeah.
The country's skint.
Yeah.
Most people are miserable with the state of the country.
Yeah.
But we're going to get the ump over a petition.
Yes.
I started a petition not so long ago.
Did you?
On that same government website, right? Yeah. I applied to, and it was to ban the sale, manufacture and distribution of half and half scarves.
Yeah.
Which are things that football
I agree with you
where
on
they
that.
have half
That
of
is
one
an
team
absolute travesty.
and half of the other.
Yeah, ridiculous.
And they're appalling things.
Yeah.
They just shouldn't be allowed.
You should go with scissors and just cut them in half. And go, look, if you want that half, go take that one.
Yeah.
You want the other half, go over there.
So I started that petition in a similar sort of vein as I reckon this bloke who runs the pub did.
That's it.
About the general election, except mine never got 3 million signatures.
No, well, never mind. That's because you're at QPR. You need a bigger team, I think, perhaps. Sorry
Quite
to say that. Now, Justin Trudeau has shown the way, though, for Keir Starmer, because he announced yesterday that he was going to resign. Let's have a look.
So last night over dinner, I told my kids about the decision that I'm sharing with you today. I intend to resign as party leader, as Prime Minister, after the party selects its next leader.
I think that's what you call a beta male, isn't it?
Is it?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I intend to resign.
This is so funny, isn't it? Because, I mean, Donald Trump's gag about making Canada the 51st state
I know.
was very, very funny.
It was funny.
Because America supplies Canada with hundreds of millions of dollars every year in aid and assistance and all that kind of stuff. And apparently Canada's economy is tanking.
Yes.
The place is an absolute...
Well, Trudeau has absolutely and utterly turned the Canadians against him somehow. Let's talk to Eileen Bell, who's radio news manager and anchor at Chorus Entertainment in Alberta in Canada. Eileen, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
How has he become...
Well, still good night.
Yeah, well, still good night.
It's before the morning.
Yes, quite. How has he become so unpopular in such a small space of time?
All the things work together. The inflation has gone down, but not enough for people. Unemployment is up around 6%. There is the carbon tax in place on fuel that has Western Canada furious with him. Recently, he asked his finance minister, deputy prime minister, president of his fan club, basically, Chrystia Freeland, to step down as finance minister, and we never found out the reason, but people think it's because he wanted to replace her with Mark Carney, who is not an elected member of parliament, but who is your former Bank of England governor.
We didn't like him much here, to be
former
honest.
Bank of Canada governor. Oh, well, you know what? He's the top name right now to replace Trudeau as Liberal leader.
Really?
Among Canadians. Yeah.
Don't do it. If I were you, I would absolutely warn anyone that knows anything about politics not to do that. Let's have a look, though, at what Trudeau said in addition to resigning.
Pierre Poilievre's vision for this country is not the right one for Canadians. Stopping the fight against climate change doesn't make sense. Backing off on the values and strength and diversity that Canada has always worked to pull itself together on is not the right path for the country. Attacking journalists, the CBC institutions, that's not what Canadians need in this moment. We need an ambitious, optimistic view of the future, and Pierre Poilievre is not offering that.
And that's his opponent, of course. But, of course, he's not offering anything either because he's leaving.
Well, he is, and he's managed to hold off being a victim of a non-confidence vote that would have taken place this week by proroguing Parliament. He went to the Governor-General, again, my time today, and asked for Parliament to be prorogued. And as a result of that, they have until March 24th before anyone can introduce a non-confidence vote. Could bring us to a May election. That time, though, is breakneck speed that they would have to come up with a new party leader, have him sworn or her sworn in as prime minister, and also have a speech to the throne, all in the next few months. And if the government fails after that, we could be at an election poll early in May.
Right.
And,
so it's all gone a bit wrong, hasn't it?
But the biggest problem, Yeah, the biggest problem with this is the timing of January 20th, with Trump coming in as president of the U.S. and threatening to introduce tariffs right away. We've got a government at this point that the prime minister says his cabinet ministers will stay firm. They're on guard. Their number one concern would be the leadership, but it would be to protect Canadian rights. And it's hard to believe that at such a vulnerable point, everything has to be frozen to go into a leadership election.
Yeah, it is absolutely incredible what's going on. Eileen, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Eileen Bell, a radio news manager and anchor at Chorus Entertainment there in Alberta, Canada, where Justin Trudeau seems to have thrown himself under the bus, which is an unusual thing for a leader to do, but it's probably long overdue. And there he is meeting Keir Starmer. Everybody that Keir Starmer meets, of course, falls prey to the curse of Keir Starmer. He went, if you remember, to Germany to visit Olaf Scholz, who about 3 days later basically collapsed the government because Starmer had been there. He went over to see Joe Biden, if you remember, and declared Joe Biden to be fit and great shape and absolutely no problem at all will he run for president again. About 3 days later, Biden dropped out of the race. So, you know,
and
if Starmer comes down the corridor looking for you, I would jump the other way.
And Arsenal Football Club have not won the Premier League for a very long time.
That's right.
And who does he support?
And he keeps going there, and they keep, according to Piers Morgan anyway, they keep underwhelming the fans with absolutely no decent strikers, but that's another story. Coming up, Peter's got a story for us about a man who was censured in his job, and I think almost lost his job because of somebody he was following on Twitter. Extraordinary story. It's all coming next.
Peter, good morning.
Good morning.
First of all, I think we did take a lot of action in government, going right back to the 2014 report into Rotherham. The independent inquiry into child sexual abuse you referred to was, of course, commissioned by a Conservative. Sajid Javid, who you and I know well, commissioned further research into it. And then, in response to that report you're referring to, Rishi Sunak established the Grooming Gangs Task Force about a year and a half ago, which led to over 550 arrests of suspected paedophiles.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until 10 o'clock. We've got 4 glorious hours of Morning Glory, of course, all the way up till 10 o'clock. Peter Blexley is here with me. Darren in Birmingham says, I really can't believe Starmer is classing everyone as far right for wanting an inquiry into the rape gangs. It's a disgrace what he classes the good people of this country as. I think a lot of people would echo that sentiment, Darren. And this from Ian on the subject of train drivers. He says, maybe some train drivers identify as women and don't wear sensible boots in the snow.
There you go, see?
It's possible.
Love your audience.
Yeah, they all get it, don't they?
Yeah.
Tell us about this story about the Royal College of, what is it? The Royal College
Speech and Language Therapists.
Speech and Language Therapists, which I didn't know existed, to be honest.
Yeah, no, this is a really, I think, terrifyingly important news story today. Page 7 of the Daily Mail. There's a man called Steve Jameson who headed up a particular group of speech and language therapists, which of course has a body that oversees speech and language therapists, which is called the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists.
Yeah.
Bear with me, everybody. This is an important story. Anyway, Steve Jameson was discovered, apparently, to have committed such a heinous crime, he followed Tommy Robinson online.
Right.
OK?
On social media?
Yeah, on social media, right? So what's the problem with that?
Right.
OK, this cuts across the whole Keir Starlin, Stasi, Starmer, freedom of speech, thought police kind of issues here.
Right.
Because I, for example, and this story is not about me, but I quote this only because it's true, I follow some odious people online. Because I come on here, and I comment.
Of course.
I like...
And you need to see what people are saying, don't you?
Exactly.
Right.
It's why I read The Guardian from time to time, because you've got to know what the enemy is thinking.
Exactly right.
And I like stuff on social media, but I don't actually like it. When I click the like button, that doesn't mean I like it.
Right.
A lot of the time, I'm liking the fact that somebody has the freedom of speech to express that view.
Course. Right. And also, you're drawing attention to it for your own purposes, because sometimes by liking it, you can then go back and find it later on, because it's easy to find.
Exactly.
Right.
But I actually like stuff that I don't really like, but I respect the fact that somebody said that.
Yes.
And I actually... You know,
so it's like you're agreeing with the fact that they've said it rather than the thing they've said.
Exactly.
Yes.
The fact that they feel they can say it so often, because that is, in essence, freedom of speech.
Yes. But this guy hasn't even done that. He's just followed Tommy Robinson.
He's just followed Tommy Robinson on a social media platform.
Yeah.
And the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists instructed a barrister to carry out an investigation into this bloke.
Yeah.
Just for following someone.
Right.
They proved that he didn't like anything that Tommy said, but yet again, I say I don't care whether he did or not. OK? And and he was forced into making an apology, Mr. Jameson. And he said, I am deeply sorry for the hurt, upset, distress, fear and anger that this caused members, colleagues and staff. This is so important.
Yeah.
And people, I urge you, because one day somebody watching or listening now will have the social media police at their front door.
Yes.
And they'll say, well, you liked that.
Yeah. Listen, I've had people already on this show over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, particularly during COVID, actually, who would say to me they'd been reported by somebody in the firm that they worked because of something they'd said on social media. Nothing to do with their work.
Yeah.
Somebody who worked with them had spotted something that they'd said, didn't like it, reported them, and they'd been hauled before some HR committee to answer for why they had this opinion. It's unbelievable.
So here, on this station, where freedom of speech and common sense are treasured and looked after, we have to continue to highlight these sort of things.
Absolutely.
Because it is odious, it is dangerous.
Yeah.
If you merely follow someone and an overriding body, your work body perhaps, that oversees what you do, doesn't like it, you could be hauled over the coals for it. What you do in your private time, what you do on social media, I think, is largely, not always and not exclusively, but largely irrelevant.
Yes,
to
unless
others.
you're told straight up before you start your
And
job,
there's a policy.
these are things that you can't do, that's different.
Yeah.
But we're going to have a story later on in the show, an exclusive story that we've got, about a jazz teacher, a veteran jazz teacher who's been cancelled by a music school, a very prestigious music school, because he had the temerity to suggest that there was no systemic racial inequality in the UK jazz scene. As a result of saying that, the people who he was teaching complained, the people who were his students wanted him banned from the school, the people who run the school wanted him banned from the school for having such an outrageous opinion, which is largely based on his own research and the facts of the matter. It's extraordinary what's going on in this country, isn't it?
And his lived experiences.
Yes.
Oh, but don't you dare have an opinion based on your lived experiences.
Yes.
Everything you've seen, heard and done. Oh, no, no, no,
We
no.
can't have that.
Because the loony left aren't going to like that.
No.
You can't say something that flies in the face of their utter nonsense, so much of which, and forgive me for repeating what I said about an hour ago, they want you to believe that we all live in this beautifully harmonious, integrated, multicultural nirvana.
Yes.
And for many people, we don't.
No, we certainly don't. We haven't even had time to show you some thugs at Westfield yesterday at the shopping centre fighting each other with machetes. We'll show you that coming up in the next hour. Peter Blexley, good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Go and report yourself somewhere to see whether you've done anything wrong over the last hour. I don't think you have personally, but I can't be sure. This is Morning Glory. More coming up after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. 2 minutes past 7. I'm Mike Graham. It is, of course, another glorious morning here, and we've got 4 glorious hours of Morning Glory all the way through until 10 o'clock. One of them has already been knocked on the head. Peter Blexley has left the building. He's got to report himself to see whether he's done anything wrong. A bit like Tulip Siddiq, who is, of course, doing exactly the same thing, even though she's pretty sure, as the anti-corruption minister for the Labour government, that she hasn't done anything wrong. She wants to check just to be sure that nobody else disagrees with her. So she's reported herself to the corruption board of the Labour government, which I imagine is pretty busy right now, trying to work out what Lord Ali's up to. Meanwhile, of course, we're going to be talking this morning about Keir Starmer's glorious announcement yesterday that he's going to completely revamp the NHS by selling it to private individuals. Nobody's saying anything about this, by the way. This is a guy who runs supposedly a socialist party that used to go absolutely apoplectic any time the Tories mentioned anything about selling off the NHS, and they went into absolute raptures of disgust. Now, apparently, it's fine. Everything's absolutely tickety-boo. More importantly, though, everyone's forgotten what he said about the NHS, because instead of actually concentrating on that, he called everybody who wants an inquiry into the grooming gang scandal as far right. And we'll be playing you a clip from that. Gawain Towler's here from Reform. Very good morning to you. Welcome back, and Happy New Year to you. I don't think I've seen you since last year. Keir Starmer's even more unpopular now than he was last year. We'll be bringing you more on that. Also, of course, there was a commentary and a debate yesterday in Parliament about whether there should be an election. 3 million people signed a petition. Here is John Lamont, a Scottish Borders MP, telling us exactly which failings Labour have got.
Labour promised not to increase national insurance. Broken. Labour promised not to raise taxes on farmers. Broken. Labour promised not to scrap the winter fuel payment. Broken. Labour promised to compensate waspy women. Broken. Labour promised to protect single-sex spaces. Broken.
Yes, I mean, that's a pretty good rap sheet, isn't it? We'll get to that as well. Also, we'll be talking about the weather. It's not very good. In parts of this country, there's a lot of flooding. There's a lot of snow as well. And you've got to be careful of the snow, especially if you're a train driver from Aslef, because apparently you're not allowed to walk on it until it's been cleared away, because it's a health and safety issue. 0344 499 1000 is the number. Elon Musk, meanwhile, seems to be back on board with reform. Yesterday afternoon, he sent out a tweet in which he appeared to agree with Nigel Farage that there should be a massive inquiry into the grooming gangs rape scandal in this country. 0344 499 1000. This is Morning Glory. Let's get it on. 7:05. Gawain Towler's here, looking very pleased with himself. I mean, I guess if you're running the Reform Party, and I know you're not running the Reform Party, you'd be pretty pleased with the way the year has started, because Richard Tice was in here yesterday, and it would appear that, as ever, Reform is kind of getting way more publicity and way more shall we say, hits on social media and in every other media form than they should be getting.
Well, whether they should be getting, that's an interesting judgment. I mean, you get what you deserve.
Well, in terms of the size of their organisation is kind of what I mean.
And you look at, but there again, you look at, say, Edith Davey, and you look at Nigel Farage, you look at Keir Starmer, you look at Nigel Farage, you look at Kevin Badenoch, and Farage is far more interesting than the others.
He is.
He also has far more experience
and
than the
people
others.
Like him a lot more.
They also dislike him a lot more.
Yeah.
But he is much more... He has that Marmite aspect.
I'm not sure he's disliked more than Keir Starmer. I think Keir Starmer's one of the most disliked politicians that's ever been.
I think most people have a sort of slight disdain rather than dislike for Starmer. I think it's increasingly dislike in certain sections of the population that he's come down with.
Certainly, I mean, our audience hates him.
Yeah, well, fair enough. I mean, this is a section of that population. But,
bar none.
I would say that there are significant chunks of the public sector that quite like him, as train drivers and various others.
Well, certainly they were all clapping, weren't they, yesterday when he was making his little speech down.
One gets the feeling at the back there's somebody with a spud gun. If you don't stop clapping now,
I know.
we're going to get you.
When he said the NHS was great, they clapped, and you're kind of going, what are you clapping exactly?
Well, that's like saying 2 + 2 is 4.
I know.
To that audience.
Yes.
To some people who have suffered under the NHS, not so much. No, the fact is that Reform have, particularly over the silly season of Christmas, with their ticker, with the fact that our membership shot up by 50,000 in that period of time.
And it's still going.
And it's still going forward and still going strong. I mean, we're now within 50% of the former Labour Party total. Right. We are growing. And what I think is very interesting, unlike most party members of most parties who have been members for years, they pay their dues, it's on annual tick over subscription. These are people who've just joined.
Yeah.
They are keen.
Yes.
They will get out there and knock on doors.
Yeah.
They will be doing the activist bit.
And many
They're
of
not
them
just
are,
members, but they will be activists.
And many of them are former members of the Tory party as well.
And former members of the Labour Party. I was doing some work with one of our candidates from last year, that hopefully you'll be talking to soon, but he is a former Labour guy. He was one of our PPCs. There's a whole series. It's not just... It's possible, one might say, that many of the more high-profile people that come to Reform are Tories, but that's largely because since Blair, anybody with a modicum of patriotism in the Labour Party has been driven out and isn't promoted.
Right.
And so it's not that they dislike our country, they just don't care about it.
No, they're not keen on the flag, are they? Which is kind of perverse.
Well, I
is sort of perverse.
I am quite a shagger in those senses.
Well, the fact it remains, funnily enough, it's a story we haven't covered yet, but we will do, that Keir Starmer spent quite a lot of money redecorating one of the press rooms because it was done out, if you remember, back in the days of Allegra Stratton.
Well, they spent a lot of money on decorating at that time as well.
They did.
It's one of the things they do.
But they painted the walls blue. He couldn't have that, so he's now repainted the walls red.
Well, he's Labour.
I mean, it's a bit ridiculous, isn't it?
It is, but I sort of get that.
80,000 quid, though, of our money.
I know.
I'm not happy about that.
A couple of parliamentary interns who'd do it for threepence halfpenny.
Well, exactly right. I could have sent one of my kids up there to do it for him.
Happily.
Now, let's have a look at Keir Starmer yesterday, though. He was supposedly announcing all these new changes to the NHS and the way that it's going to run. Nobody really was very interested in that. They were far more interested in what he had to say about the grooming gangs. And here's what he said.
And when politicians, and I mean politicians, who sat in government for many years, are casual about honesty, decency, truth and the rule of law, calling for inquiries because they want to jump on a bandwagon of the far right, then that affects politics because a robust debate can only be based on the true facts.
Well, surely a robust debate can only be based on the true facts if you know what the facts are.
Well, yes.
And the facts have yet to be determined in some of these cases, which is why you would want to have an inquiry, isn't it?
Well, the point is what I find is astonishing. We know that it's 100,000 plus girls across the country, but we don't know exactly because it's over 50 towns.
Right.
There's been 4 or 5 investigations and inquiries. The J inquiry did a fair amount, but it did a lot of covering up too.
The J inquiry, I've got some facts from the J inquiry here, which is what Labour say they're going to use as their kind of, I don't know, their yardstick.
It's the start of 10.
Yeah, as to what they are now willing to do. However, listen to some of the facts from that particular inquiry. They listed a whole series of different places where things were going on, right? But they looked at 6 case study areas where there were no significant reports whatsoever of grooming gangs at all. They used the term Pakistani once in the whole report. They relied on officials rather than testimony of survivors. None of the northern towns which were featured prominently in the scandal were chosen. The final report mentions Rotherham once in 400 pages. It only refers to Rochdale in relation to Cyril Smith. It doesn't mention Telford, and basically 2/3 of a statement from Maggie Oliver for the report was cut out.
Yeah,
so it's a completely ill-fitting report, shall we say?
It does not do the job that is required.
No.
And I think one of the things I think is fascinating, and Starmer is one of these politicians, as are others across the board, who will make a public apology for slavery.
Yeah.
Nothing to do with them.
No.
Slavery happened 200 years ago.
Right.
They'll make a public apology for Grenfell.
Yes.
And for the Windrush generation.
Right.
But will they make a public apology to the hundreds of thousands of girls and now women who are still living through the nightmare of what's happened to them? No.
No.
They won't. And what? If there's anybody who deserves apology, it's those people who are suffering today.
But we know exactly why that is, because Labour have got a problem with this story, and the problem they've got with the story is they don't want to upset the Muslim vote. And let's look at what happened when Chris Philp yesterday,
Well, they're
who's
upsetting
not
the Sikh
one of
vote.
my favourite people, but he's the Shadow Home Secretary, he started talking about this in Parliament yesterday, and he was roundly mocked, by the way, by the opposition on the government benches. Have a look.
It is not far right to stand up for victims of mass rape. And smearing people.
Order.
It's those concerns.
Shadows. People want to hear the statement. Chris Phil.
Smearing people who raise those issues is exactly how this ended up getting covered up in the first place.
And he's right about that,
He's not
isn't he? Because councils did it, you know, local MPs did it, Labour Party chiefs did it. People like Simon Danchuk were warned off.
Yep.
I mean, Richard Tice was here yesterday saying he had received, and we have yet to know more on this, but he broke the story here yesterday. He received an email last night, or the night before rather, from an Oldham councillor basically warning him off looking into what was going on in Oldham. Even now. Incredible.
I remember in Rotherham back in, 2008, 2009, being there talking to what was then the UKIP candidates and councillors, and some of the stories that were coming out, talking to some of the victims, how that they ran down to the door when the door knocked, and in front of them was a black fellow with a red rosette who'd been her rapist. Knocking on that door. The poor thing.
Right.
Just terrifying.
Well,
Will you vote for us?
Well, look at the stories we've seen even in the last 2 weeks, since Elon Musk has stirred the pot, as it were, and this story has now become a live story again, which is very good because he's done that. We had Samantha Smith on telling us that her abusers have never been put before any kind of court of law, were never charged with any crime. We've had other women who have come forward to say that their abuser was sent on holiday with them. Other people who were somehow allowed to adopt victims that they had been abusing, and so they became part of their family.
And police took them back to them.
And police were complicit in all of this. Police arresting girls of 12 years of age for being drunk and disorderly while they were in a house with 5 grown Pakistani men who were raping them. I mean, it's incredible.
It just beggars belief. And though Musk has come in like a bull at a gate with, one must say, intemperate language in some cases, but he's only just become aware of it. We've known about this for over a decade.
Absolutely.
And so therefore we've almost become inured to it, horrifying though it is. All this is brand new to Musk. If I'd never heard of it before, I would be fizzing.
You would be.
Fizzing. Steam would be coming out of all my orifices.
Absolutely.
And I sympathise with his rage because I've felt that rage. Now, I admit, because we've read about it, we've known since Andrew Norfolk, since Sue Reid, since other people, since Anne Cryer, that this has been going on, we've almost become blunted to the sheer horror of it. But now the rest of the world sees. And as I say, I don't just want an inquiry. I want a formal apology. A formal apology from the governing class.
I'd like more than that. I would like to see some of these people...
and I want heads to roll.
I would like some of these people prosecuted.
I want heads to roll.
Who covered it up, right?
Prosecuted, sacked, the works. No pension, nothing.
Right.
Because what they have done is diabolical.
It really is. And they're still allowing it to go ahead.
Well, yes.
Ed Davey got a bit of fire and ire from Musk yesterday. Ed Davey said this on Twitter: "People have had enough of Elon Musk interfering with our country's democracy when he clearly knows nothing about Britain. It's time to summon the US ambassador to ask why an incoming US official is suggesting the UK government should be overthrown." Elon Musk, I have to say, in one of the greatest answers to any politician of all time, said, "What exactly do I fail to understand about your failure to stop the mass rape of little girls in Britain, you snivelling cretin?" Which is the greatest description of Ed Davey that I've seen for a while.
My feeling is Ed Davey's worried about Elon Musk interfering in our affairs. We should be worried about people interfering with young girls.
Yeah, well, exactly right. And this is typical as well of Keir Starmer and the whole BBC's attitude, who, when they had Nigel Farage on Sunday, were more worried about what Elon Musk was saying about Jess Phillips and the language he was using about Keir Starmer than they were about mass rape. Let's have a look at what Nigel said, actually, responding to what Keir Starmer said about the grooming inquiry.
Well, so much talk over the last few days about grooming gangs, or should I say rape gangs. And Keir Starmer today saying that anyone who's calling for a full public inquiry is jumping on the bandwagon of the far right. Wrong, Prime Minister. The vast majority of people in this country are absolutely mortified by what has gone on. But even worse, the cover-up we've had from the police, social services, and both Conservative and Labour governments. The inquiries that have happened so far have been nothing more than a whitewash. There needs to be a full public inquiry. Let us find out the truth of the scale of this. I'm told that in up to 50 British towns, these gang rapes were going on. I believe the public need the truth. We must have an inquiry.
And, of course, he's absolutely right. And despite all the frothing at the mouth that was going on in the past 24 hours about how Elon Musk and Nigel Farage had fallen out, Elon Musk then retweeted that particular social media post by Nigel Farage and just said, yes.
Yeah.
So, presumably we're all back and good in the hood.
Who knows?
Doesn't matter, does it?
It doesn't matter.
No.
As I said, Musk is an extraordinary man. I suspect he's going to be very busy in a couple of weeks' time when he actually starts his job.
Yeah.
But what he has done has brought to not just our own attention, but the globe's attention, the absolute shame of our
Which was
institutions.
actually necessary and needed.
Yes, because you know, it's been silenced. It's not... Yes, the Crow report... How many years ago was that? And how many heads have rolled? How many people have been fired? How many people have been shamed for what they have done and what they have failed to do? And as the general confession goes, forgive me for what I've done and what I have not done.
Well, indeed.
And it is what they have not done.
But isn't it interesting that Keir Starmer's MO now, it would seem, having been in and having watched him for 6 months,
hasn't he?
is to basically not do anything about anything and to cover everything up and to complain about the far right, as he did in the summer with the riots, locking people up willy-nilly, telling everyone that, you know, he was having to, you know, get a grip of the country because somehow it was being, you know, usurped and diverted by horrible, nasty, ghastly far-right thugs. When in fact, ordinary people in this country, I would say a vast majority of ordinary people, 95% probably, I can't imagine anyone who wouldn't want an inquiry into this. Right?
It might be worth doing a poll.
Yeah, I mean, how on earth would anybody not want to have an inquiry into how this happened, what we should do about it, and people that should be punished for it?
To a certain extent. I mean, we've had a lot of court cases, and obviously we need more when it comes to the actual perpetrators of the crimes themselves. Yes,
but there's been an awful lot of
but
court cases that didn't happen.
Agreed.
You know?
But to a certain extent, this inquiry isn't really an inquiry into the rapes themselves.
No.
We know about that. There have been inquiries into the rapes themselves. We know they happened, and we know they may well be continuing.
Yes.
What we need an inquiry is the failures of the institutions of our government, the people we pay for, to look after us.
Yes.
And they have failed and failed and failed
and
again.
they've also failed in deporting anybody, as far as we know.
How many of these rapists have been sent?
But we know that many of them have not been, even though they should have been deported. Many of them are still here because of...
But are they joint nationals, or are they foreign nationals, or are they Brits?
They're joint nationals.
If they're joint nationals, then be gone with them.
And they should be gone.
Be gone.
You know, absolutely right. But that hasn't happened. And the idea that Keir Starmer thinks that he can just sweep this under the carpet...
You can't just blame Labour for that.
No.
Even though he was DPP for a period, you can't just blame Labour for that.
No.
You've got to blame the Conservatives, who failed and failed and failed again. They talk a good game, but what do they actually do?
Right.
These people are still walking the streets. They're still in Asda.
Yeah.
And that is an outrage.
It is. Absolutely unbelievable. We'll keep talking about this, of course, because many of you have got things to say about it. Many of you want to get in touch, and many of you are getting in touch. How about this from Bill in Cheshire? Starmer's speech yesterday, he used the words honesty, decency and truth. Ha ha. That's rich coming from him. A compulsive liar, freebie taker, promise breaker and selective amnesia sufferer. Unbelievable. Now that is a pretty standard response that I get from people every single day about Keir Starmer. Zoe in Lancashire says this, morning Mike, this is what Starmer is going to do, call us all far right and racist, so we'll shut up. He thinks he will scare us into silence in fear of being locked up. Disgusting, we aren't going to be threatened into silence anymore. That's the way people are feeling. They're angry.
And going back to one of the things you were saying right at the beginning of the section, but what he was supposed to be talking about, isn't privatising the NHS far right?
Well,
and isn't he far right then?
Well, apparently, privatising the NHS is one of the worst things that any Tory government
in fact, they'd phone them out, point things and say that's a far right thing, and yet he's doing it himself.
Well, do you remember Jeremy Corbyn?
Safe in their hands.
Do you remember Jeremy Corbyn telling us all that Donald Trump had come to Britain when he was president
to buy the
NHS?
It'd probably be more efficient if they had.
Well, it probably would have been. Putting Elon Musk in charge of it. Let's get a voice note from James.
Morning, Mike. It's James from Blackburn. Oh, I'm so angry this morning. What's he doing, this guy, Mr. Starmer, our mate? What's he doing? Far right. Did he not learn his lesson from the summer when we know it wasn't far right then and it's not far right now? Is that the way this next 4 years is going to go? As soon as someone doesn't agree with him, he just says it's far right. And yeah, you're absolutely right. What's he doing? Why is no one mad that he's all right to sell off the NHS as well, which I agree with. But, you know, if it was the Tory party doing that or a far right party, his lot would be up in arms, wouldn't they? Yeah. Very angry this morning, Mike. Keep up the good work.
James, good to talk to you. People are annoyed. People are really, really fed up to the back teeth with this ridiculous government, this ludicrous Prime Minister, and this tone-deaf administration who don't seem to understand Britain at all.
As I said earlier, it's not that they dislike Britain, they just don't care. They belong to... Their mind sits in a global elite, in a Davos mindset. and they're not actually interested. They hold the people of this country in a sort of bemused contempt. They don't understand them, and what they do understand, they don't like.
It's
much.
the Emily Thornberry manoeuvre, isn't it? Looking at that, it's a white van. There's a guy with an England flag.
I'll admit, there's goodness in Emily Thornberry. I've personally witnessed some goodness.
You have to look for a long time.
But yes, that attitude. That attitude. I remember seeing that photograph and tweeting it out and causing all sorts of mayhem back in the day in Rochester. But yes, it is this. We don't understand them. We don't like them, and what we see of them, we just hate. Actually, it's and slightly frightened. And they should be frightened.
They should be.
Because the electoral whirlwind will come.
And it's on the way. We've got lots more to do. Keep those voice notes coming. Gawain, thank you very much indeed. Gawain Towler, former advisor to Nigel Farage. An awful lot still going on from one pillar to the other post. This is Talk.
Grateful for anything that brings this back onto a national public platform, because it is such a monumental failure of decades in this country. So anything that draws us back into these issues, for me, is worthwhile. I think what we have to be careful of, though, Julia, is that we don't deflect from the central issues of this, which is children being raped and being failed by the authorities.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 7:26. I'm Mike Graham, and this, of course, is the home of common sense. It's the year of common sense. We've been talking about it for a long time already. We're only on January the 7th, but already things are happening, moving along rather swiftly. We've got Keir Starmer once again accusing most of the country of Great Britain and Northern Ireland of being far right because they want to have an inquiry into the sexual abuse and grooming rape gang scandal. Apparently, if you want to do that, you're jumping on a bandwagon of the far right. He's got that wrong completely. Also, yesterday, he was supposed to be launching and relaunching the NHS, but he appears to be privatising it, and hardly any of the papers have actually covered any of it, because, of course, all of his comments about the far right appear to have taken it over. Let's get a voice note from Sean.
Morning, Mike. Sean from Grimsby here. Another day of being far right. you know, Keir Starmer should hang his head. It's exactly the language like that why we found ourselves in this rape gang crisis in the first place. He should hang his head, mate. Great show.
He should absolutely hang his head in shame. There's more comedy watching this government than any comedy on the BBC, says this texter. Now the corruption minister isn't sure she's involved in any corruption and needs to check. 10 out of 10 for comedy this morning. No idea, Keir. And then this from Dawn, who says, I so needed a laugh this morning. At least she didn't wipe her boogie on Keir's free gear, as he needs some more. I'm still giggling. This, of course, is the woman who was standing around behind Sir Keir Starmer as he launched the NHS privatisation scheme yesterday. She appears to have some trouble with her bogey in her nose. She's wiping it there with a tissue. She's also then decided that actually she's not getting it, so she might need to use her finger. She's literally standing over the left shoulder of the Prime Minister. She must know she's on television. There she goes. And then, unfortunately, she puts it in her mouth and then strokes some of it into her hair. I'm not quite sure if this is normal Labour Party policy or whether she's far right. We can't really tell. Anyway, we'll keep you updated on what happens with that. Sorry to have to embarrass her, but look, if you're going to stand right next to the Prime Minister while he's doing a press conference, you might want to think that you would be on camera, for heaven's sake. Let's talk to Benedict Spence, political commentator, of course, because according to all the papers this morning, the NHS relaunch didn't really happen. The Times have got a spread on it on pages 10 and 11, saying booking NHS treatment should be as easy as online shopping. But it seems to me, Benedict, very good morning to you, that Keir Starmer's privatising the NHS by the back door. And surely if the Tories had done that, he'd be up in arms, wouldn't he?
Oh, absolutely. Good morning, Mike. This is one of the things that was one of the criticisms that was always going to be levelled at Keir Starmer, certainly from the further left elements of the Labour movement. And you'll probably hear, complaints about this sort of thing from the Novara media crowd and that sort of thing, which Keir Starmer is effectively just a Tory, which, sort of makes you think rather despondently about what Toryism is, I suppose. Given how incompetent and frankly how very left-wing this government is, that they sort of consider this to be, basically Thatcher on steroids. Yeah. But there you are. I mean, it's one of the things that you could say about Labour. One of the good things, I suppose, that you could say about Labour is when they're elected, even if the public doesn't trust them, which they absolutely don't and didn't even at the election, there is a sense that they will at least be able to do things on the NHS that the Tories wouldn't get away with because the Tories are too scared of being accused of privatising the NHS, whereas Labour can do more or less what they want and get away with it. Having said that, I'm not sure that this government has entirely got a handle on this. I mean, of course, we had the whole thing the other day, didn't we, about the possibility of over 60s having to pay for prescriptions and things like that. And it doesn't sound like, if they are privatising it by the back door, doesn't sound like they're doing it especially successfully.
No, well, they won't be doing anything particularly successfully. But we've got Wes Streeting writing in the Mail today, and he said this as well over the course of the last few days, that he will never allow ideological dogma to make patients wait longer for care. And that was the sort of prelim to saying that's why we're going to allow people to go to private hospitals in their area. We're going to make that more available to them. It'll still be on the NHS coin, of course, but basically they're going to adopt private hospitals. But a lot of people tell me that that's been going on for a while anyway. I mean, most of these new revelatory kind of developments in the NHS that Keir Starmer announced yesterday are already happening.
Well, they are. They've had to, because there simply isn't the capacity in the NHS, and there hasn't been a desire to increase it or the money to increase it. So, yeah, you're right. Lots of NHS stuff is actually done on the private sector at great cost to the taxpayer, very inefficiently. And that's the thing. When we talk about privatising the NHS by the back door, you almost wish it was privatising the NHS, because it would be a lot more cost-effective if they were doing it properly. Whereas, of course, this situation, private companies know that they have the healthcare, that they have the health service over a bit of a barrel, so they can charge.
Absolutely right. Meanwhile, more news on the economy this morning. 1 in 4 service companies are cutting jobs, according to the Telegraph, after the record tax raid launched by Rachel Reeves in the budget, of course, back in November. 23% of companies and service industries, which includes everything from restaurants to law firms, have reported a fall in their workforce levels in December, and there's going to be a massive shedding of jobs after employers have been hit with a £25 billion increase in national insurance. Well, I mean, we could have told them this is what would happen, couldn't we?
Yeah, I think, in fact, you and I did discuss this before it went into effect. I think to be fair, I think every talk radio station discussed it at some point. It was not a secret that this was likely to happen, that, providers, the companies were going to have to find ways of cutting costs somewhere. They wouldn't simply be able to pass all of them on to their consumers. And that was what was going to happen. I don't think people expected it to be quite this large so quickly. But, of course, there is the looming threat of changes to employment laws in this country that are going to make things a lot harder to dismiss people the second they become employed or once they're on your books. So perhaps it does make a lot of sense that people are shedding now before it becomes too difficult to actually sack people. I mean, this is, again, part of the problem that Labour has, that it thinks it can interfere in market mechanisms. Look, if you put constraints on companies that mean that suddenly they can't turn profits, well, they're going to try to find ways of keeping their heads above water. And if you then threaten them with changing the law to make it harder to shed deadwood in terms of employees, well, of course, then the first thing they're going to do is try to shed those employees before those laws come into effect.
Right, absolutely right. And meanwhile, there's more trouble inside of the Labour government with Tulip Siddiq. We were talking about this earlier with Peter Blexley. Tulip Siddiq, who, of course, isn't sure whether she's done anything wrong, so she's now referred herself, in the time-honoured tradition, to the parliamentary watchdog, just in case she's made a mistake about not declaring how she got hold of a free house in Hampstead.
She, of course, is related to the former leader of Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina, who was very unfortunately ousted in a popular rebellion late last year. Tulip Siddiq, obviously, she goes to great lengths always to point out that she's a British MP, not a Bangladeshi MP, and that's where her sort of interests lie. But of course, it's not particularly optimistic, is it? It's not a particularly optimistic look to know that it's, I think, more than one property now that she has been staying in London that is not owned by her. And it's not even, of course, her taxpayer-subsidised accommodation in London, that this is stuff that is either provided directly by the Awami League or by supporters of the Awami League. And, of course, this, I don't know if you've seen this, the footage doing the rounds, all the way back from 2017, when journalists began to pick up on Tulip Siddiq's links to the regime in Bangladesh. And a journalist, I think, came up to her on some sort of campaign day, and she actually said, "You need to be careful. I'm a Labour MP."
Yes.
And you just think, well, that's... now that all of this stuff is going down, and of course the fact that she has been appointed Labour's corruption czar, it's a perfect storm, isn't it? You just sort of knew the second that these things began to happen that she started throwing her weight around saying, "You need to be careful because you know who I am," and she was given this role. You just kind of thought, her comeuppance it's en route, isn't it? Something's going to catch up.
And you know what's also interesting, which I didn't know until today, the piece in the Mail suggests that there was a 2016 trip to Bangladesh which was funded by Labour Friends of Bangladesh, which included one Keir Starmer, who went on that trip because he quite enjoyed meeting Miss Siddiq's family. Basically, he thought that she's a good close friend, and so he wanted to go and meet Ms Hasina while he was a backbencher. He then hosted another meeting with Ms Hasina in 2022, where he was pictured hosting her at the Houses of Parliament when he was leader of the opposition. So, you know, the ties that bind go quite deep into Labour.
He doesn't have many close friends in politics, but I don't think he
has many close friends, period, does he?
No, but it's fairly well known that of all of his close friends, Tulip Siddiq is in fact a close family friend. He really knows how to pick them. But it's very interesting, isn't it? That we're getting all of this now, aren't we, from Labour Party figures saying, well, we don't like the idea of foreign interference in our politics. Well, right here, these seem to be rather close ties to foreign interference, either in ours or in other countries' politics. It's okay when it's Labour doing it.
Absolutely right. And one final one, the front page of the Times this morning, we haven't managed to get to this one yet. Thousands of new plug-in points herald an electric car revolution. This is according to the Times. I'm not quite sure they've got that right, but the scale of the charging rollout was revealed by Heidi Alexander, who, of course, is the new Secretary of State for Transport. She says Labour are going to press ahead with reverting to a 2030 ban on the sale of petrol and diesel cars, which is not that far away. I'm not sure that this is not a biggest problem that they've got here, because we're literally talking 5 years from now. So if I was going to buy a new car for the family, for example, this year, what am I going to do? Because if they're going to say that a petrol or diesel car is going to be more or less worthless in 5 years' time, why would I buy one? They're literally killing the car industry.
Yeah, it's a very foolish move. And the problem is when they talk about the rolling out of electric vehicle technology, they simply don't have the funds or the capacity to do it. We're not going to hit these targets. And if you did, you'd only be able to do it maybe in a couple of urban areas. that actually are predisposed to being able to do this.
Right.
Actually, most urban areas are not. They're too heavily built up. They're too unfriendly to this.
Yeah.
The national grid hasn't been upgraded to accommodate this sort of thing. And that's, of course, before you even get into the fact that half the country still lives rurally in the UK. This is just never going to be able to be rolled out. And on top of that, of course, we have the fact that electricity costs are going through the roof relatively in this country. They are the highest in Europe. Why? Because of where we actually source our energy from. We refuse to drill for oil, gas. We refuse to frack. So we're making these things more expensive. And that's why it's not going to end up being rolled out on time. If it is, it will come at a massive cost to other things. And frankly, I don't think we can afford to be taking money from other budgets at the moment.
No, I think you're absolutely right. Good to talk to you, Bad Expense. Thank you very much indeed. How about this from Claire? Bad morning, Mike. She says, from hence on, I'll refuse to say it's a good one, not until this lying sociopath Starmer is outed. The barefaced slander of blaming the far right for their concern over the children of our towns and cities up and down our country only shows his agenda. And Joe in Norfolk says this, great show, Mike. I'm offended being called far right by Keir Starmer. Everyone who wishes to see justice for those young girls like myself should write to number 10, addressed to Pain in the Rear Keir, asking for a written apology for calling them far right. Let's see thousands of letters turning up at number 10. What a good idea. Absolutely right, Joe. Well done. Send letters and say, I object to being called far right by Keir Starmer just because I care about the young women in this country who should not be being raped on an industrial scale by Pakistani men. That's the wording of the letter, if you so wish to do it. Let's get a voice note.
Morning, Mike. Phil from Hertfordshire. So, anybody that comments that they want an inquiry into the child abuse and probably want people to be held accountable for letting down the suffering and probably betraying these young girls, they're now far right, are they?
Absolutely disgusting, isn't it? Absolutely and utterly disgusting. Keir Starmer not only has no idea, Keir, but he is here, Keir, and he needs to be clear, Keir, on what it is that we want in this country. Keir, get on with it and do what the public wants instead of what you wish to hide from them. 0344 499 1000 is the number. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 7:41. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until 10 o'clock, of course. 4 glorious hours of Morning Glory every single weekday morning from 6 a.m. to 10. We've been on for practically 2 hours already, almost halfway through the show. We're going to talk about the retirement yesterday, or the resignation, you might say, of Archbishop Wellby. Wellby, of course, leaving the job as Archbishop of Canterbury. He apparently threw a bit of a shindig as a result of that, but we'll come to that in a moment. We're going to talk to Baroness Diane Hayter. But just before that, have a look at this story. This is in the Daily Telegraph today. The Duke of York has been reported to police after using a false name to register a company. Apparently he used the name Andrew Inverness, which was a title given to him by Queen Elizabeth II, his mother, back in 1986 when he got married to Sarah Ferguson. He was given the title the Earl of Inverness, which doesn't necessarily entitle him to use the name Andrew Inverness, which is not a real name, to register a company. Companies House have got some quite rigid rules about what you have to do, and you have to register a proper address and you have to register a proper name. Now, according to Republic, those ghastly people who don't like the monarchy, and I'm not very much in favour of them, they, in the guise of Graham Smith, the guy that runs it, have basically filed a complaint to the Metropolitan Police saying that the registration of a company called Naples Gold Limited, which is just one of the companies that he registered as an investment vehicle, was registered wrongly under his false name of Andrew Inverness. So more trouble for Prince Andrew. You do wonder what on earth he was thinking. You know, he clearly doesn't pay any attention to anybody who gives him advice, does he? You know, Andrew, are you going to register this company separately from your own actual sort of business of running whatever it is that you do as the Duke of York? Yes. I'm going to just run a couple of private companies and funnel some money into them. I'll just pretend my name's Andrew Inverness. Well, I think you'll find that might be illegal. Really? Well, never mind. Nobody's going to find out. Well, what if they do? Companies House records are, in fact, public records. You can look at them and see what's on there. And, oh, don't worry, I'll just put a different address down. Yeah, but you can't do that either. That's also illegal. Never mind. Nobody will find out. Well, now they have, and now it's been reported to the police. Not for the first time. Unbelievable. We'll come back to that story in a moment. Let's talk to Baroness Diane Hayter, former Shadow Deputy Leader of the House of Lords. She's a Labour peer, of course. Diane, very good morning to you.
Good morning to you.
Very nice to see you. Happy New Year.
Extraordinary story. Thank you very much.
Yes, the Duke of York story really is quite remarkable, isn't it? But, you know, there's no fool as an old fool, as they say. Archbishop Wellby, no longer Archbishop Wellby. What do we call him now, first of all? What's his... is he Lord Wellby?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Whether he's... no, he's not, certainly not Lord Wellby. He's left the House of Lords. But I guess he's still the Reverend, or Mr.
I suppose he's still got the cloth. Is he still a man of the cloth, I suppose?
Yeah, he hasn't been defrocked.
Right. I was actually asking this question yesterday because I wasn't sure if he would remain a member of the House of Lords, and I was told he probably would, but you're saying no, he's no longer in the House of Lords.
No, he gave his valedictory speech just before Christmas.
Yes, I remember that. It was a rather bad speech.
And that's what you do when you leave the House of Lords. It's interesting. I mean, the only peers that automatically retire at the age of 70 are the bishops in our house. So we're having quite a debate at the moment about whether all of us should leave at a certain age. But actually, they've always left at 70, right. And so he would have left in a year's time anyway, when he would be 70. He was, I think, he was 69 yesterday, wasn't he? So he would have left anyway if this hadn't happened.
Yes. And a rather ignominious end for him, really, isn't it? Because his speech, as you say, that he made in the House of Lords was roundly criticised, and he had to apologise for it because he was rather flippant about the reason why he was departing, and more or less sort of made out that, you know, the last time anybody was treated this badly, they were beheaded. And it was all a bit sort of in poor taste, wasn't it?
It was extraordinary. I mean, I thought that I expected that as a fairly thoughtful person, he would have crafted it in a very different way. I'm sure he spent a lot of time thinking about it, and therefore it was a double surprise, if you like, to find that it was so badly pitched. And not only did he not pay due acknowledgement to many of the victims who remember, have to be very brave to come forward, but actually didn't even look at the role of the church. And that is the big issue, as we're seeing with other institutions at the moment, where an organisation isn't willing to be absolutely thorough and disciplined in taking on those who misbehave within their jurisdiction.
Yes, and the other thing about Archbishop Wellby, I suppose we shouldn't call him that anymore, is he does appear to be a bit tone deaf, doesn't he? Because he had a bit of a party last night, in addition to that speech that he made, which he had to apologise for. And a lot of people are saying it's not really that appropriate to sort of celebrate his time in office, as it were, given the nature of the way that he's had to leave.
Well, I think there's two things. One is it was his birthday yesterday, and I think a little bit of Christian acceptance of someone celebrating their birthday is okay. I think your other point, though, is right. I think it was probably a day for contemplation.
Yes.
I also understand he did spend a lot of time in prayer and in services.
I mean, whatever happened to the hair
again,
shirt business?
Yeah.
You know?
And it just seems, again, I think your word of tone deaf. He must have known this would be covered.
Yeah.
And again, it doesn't seem to put the victims, and actually even more, the reputation of the church. I would have expected that anyone at the moment who has, after all, held one of the highest, very highest offices in the land, and I'm sure is committed to the Church of England, of which I happen not to be a member, but that they would think, what is right for the church at the moment? It's in difficult times. How can I, in my last day, most help the church re-establish or get re-establish trust in its working?
Right.
So it is interesting that he didn't take the opportunity to really put the church first. Although I do understand having a birthday party. Those of us who are very old still quite enjoy that bit of it.
Well, I mean, that may well be, but whether or not somebody else should pay for it is another matter. I mean, if I have a birthday party, I tend to pay for it myself. But finally, I mean, given the conversations that are currently being had, although Keir Starmer seems more keen to be putting people into the House of Lords than abolishing it these days, has this kind of put a focus on the bishops themselves and whether they should remain as part of the House of Lords?
I don't think it has. I mean, that's obviously up for discussion. I think we all agree we want a smaller house.
Yeah.
And I think if we do cut the size of it, it would be appropriate to cut, every bit of it, but proportionally. I think the more interesting thing is there was some discussion about whether, former archbishops have come as a life peer. And I think that's the more interesting question, because what I hope is that the appointments to the House of Lords should not be used as an honour, as a thank you, as a sort of a thank you for a job done, but actually anyone appointed as a life peer should come here to work, to contribute, to be part of our legislature. So I would like anyway to end the idea that people come to the House of Lords as a thank you, as an honour, but they should be coming because they have work to contribute.
Yes.
And I think that's the interesting bit in the discussion now. Nobody should be here as of right because they were Archbishop or because they were head of the civil service. They should come if they're willing to put their shoulder to the wheel and do some really serious work that we do undertake in the House of Lords.
Yes, I think that's a very sound idea indeed. I would back that. Baroness Diane Hayter, thank you very much indeed for talking to us there about the final days of the Archbishop of Wokeby. He is, of course, Archbishop Wellby. No longer. He's now the Reverend Wellby, I guess. And I guess he still wears the cloth. He still is part of the Church of England, but he's no longer running it, and he's no longer covering up child abuse scandals, which can only be a good thing, really. And he's not in the House of Lords anymore either, apparently. So that's a good thing too. This is Talk.
Friday night, and you lucky people have got 4 of Talk's mightiest personalities in one room. I mean, what could go right? Me, Jeremy Kyle, Michael Graham, Julia, I'm Not Grumpy Tonight, Hartley Brewer and Kev O'Sullivan. Have you seen this?
Yeah.
What are you thinking? Jules is smiling.
I think they've made us all look a lot better than we actually look.
There
I know what to ask for next time I go to the hairdresser.
I'd like to talk about Jez's nipples on his...
You got nipples? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got nipples.
I don't know what to
I didn't
say.
think you had nipples. I assumed you just came in an egg.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 7:53. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until 10 o'clock, of course. Good morning, Mike. Peter Blexley is brilliant. Wish he was in charge. That's from Sue in Essex, a far-right thug, apparently. And one from Brittany in the USA. Good morning, Mike. Mr. Starmer, in my opinion, is a total plank of the century. Love your show. Have a great day. Well, let's talk about Starmer, because yesterday, of course, he was not supposed to be talking about far-right thuggery. He wasn't supposed to be telling everyone who wants to have an investigation into the grooming rape scandal of our young children to be far-right. He was supposed to be launching his new vision for the NHS. Let's talk to Professor Carol Sikora, Medical Director of Rutherford Cancer Centres. Carol, very good morning to you. Happy New Year to you.
Thank you very much, Mike.
Good to see you. I mean, it's all been rather overshadowed, hasn't it, what Starmer wanted to say yesterday? But I've been sort of slightly tongue-in-cheek suggesting that he seems to be wanting to privatise it. And surely if the Tories had done that, he'd have been all over them like a rash. But he seems to be embracing the privatisation of some parts of it. And I'm not sure that anything that he said yesterday is particularly new, is it?
No, I'm afraid, you know, 1 million new appointments, great, but who's going to do them? I mean, there's no more staff. You can't. Locum agencies, people that hire, agencies that hire temporary doctors are crying. I get approached once a day with them as, can I go to Wakefield and do an oncology locum, for example? I mean, you know, it's just understaffed. The private sector can do efficient things and it can innovate in a way the public sector struggles. You know, NHS committees are the most time-wasting, boring place to go. If you really want to go to sleep, you go and sit on a trust board. I can tell you, it's just loud mouths talking a load of rubbish, and it's no way any industry could run. And and the politicians couldn't run a business. So I think that's our problem. We've got to. The NHS is in trouble. Streeting says it's in trouble. So at least the admission's there. They're calling out for reform, but no one knows what the reform actually looks like. Yesterday was the first attempt to show that to people.
Well, one of the things that he made a big deal about was this NHS app, which, of course, first kind of emerged during COVID, where they wanted everybody to do everything on an app. Now, one, that's not practical for an awful lot of people, particularly elderly people who don't know how to use apps and wouldn't really know what to do with one if they had one. Similarly, I mean, if you suddenly go tick, tick, tick on an app and you go, right, I've made an appointment for something, that's all very well, but it has to be somebody who can actually see you. So unless you're providing more people to see people, the app doesn't make any difference, does it?
Well, I think using, you know, everyone's got these. I mean, the next generation of old people, namely me, really old people, will know how to use the phone, a smartphone. Yeah. And, you know, it's amazing. To book an airline ticket, a cheap ticket, you have to be able to use a phone. You have to be, and as we've heard, one of the budget airlines is going to introduce, you can't have a paper boarding pass, you've got to have it on your phone. So that's the way the world is going. And the NHS should embrace that. All I can get from the NHS on this is the numbers of my vaccines for COVID. I can't get anything else. I can get prescription on it and I can go to a pharmacist with it, but I can't get an appointment. I can't book a scan. I can't do anything. That's going to change. And that is sensible. Can it be done? The app is a private sector device. It wasn't made by NHSX, which is the IT division of NHS. The phone's obviously private sector. Why not have private CT scanners that go and do it. It would be much more efficient.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, I say this, I said it to Stephen Dorrell yesterday when he was on, you know, I know people who have gone privately to get things like that done, and it seems to be absolutely so smooth as clockwork that you can go from, you know, getting an appointment to see a doctor, to getting a referral, to getting a scan done, and to get the results of the scan, all within, you know, a week or 10 days. I don't see why the NHS can't do that.
I know. There are Go Compare sites on Google where you can, if you want to say, my son had a bad knee, he's a marathon runner, he wanted an MRI of his knee, you know, it would take 6 months on the NHS. You go on the Go Compare site, 300 quid, 8 o'clock in the evening, somewhere in Waterloo, fantastic service. Yeah. Result the next day, scan given to him as a disc so he could go to an orthopaedic surgeon and ask for an opinion. And that's the way forward. And people don't mind travelling and they don't mind doing things at unusual hours, 10 o'clock at night, if it's cheaper or it's quicker. And that's what people want. They want quick service. You go into hospitals and you just look at the waiting room, and the one thing you notice is they're all old. Everybody is old, and that's clogging the whole system. It's not been planned for the age distribution we've got in this country. That's where we need to have a revolution.
No, quite. And what do you make of this other suggestion that if people are obese or they're smokers, they'll be sort of shoved to the back of the queue until they take some kind of control over their own body? Basically, people who are obese will be told they'll only be given a date for an operation if they've been assessed as fit to proceed.
I think that's a dangerous way forward, Mike.
I think so.
A shaming, a fat shaming, smoking shaming. Yeah. I think treat people equally. You know, there was a fuss at the beginning of at the end of last week about migrants being given priority in the emergency room to come forward. I think any sort of prioritisation or anything holding people back for any reason is probably not the correct way. It's also quite difficult to enforce, and it's unpleasant to enforce. And I think healthcare's got to be a pleasant environment. It's exactly like at an airport. The airline staff are pleasant, the security staff can be a bit grumpy, and they're careful there's a boundary between the two. So I think you'd have the same in healthcare if you tried to enforce that sort of thing.
Yes, I think so. Professor Carol Sakura, great to talk to you. Sorry we don't have a lot of time this morning. We'll get you back on to talk more fully about what exactly the Labour Party and the Labour government want to actually do. We've got some good voice notes coming in. We'll play those to you coming up in the next hour. Also, we're going to be talking to Ryan Saby, Deputy Political Editor at The Sun. Keir Starmer has done it again. He's upset the entire country. Well done, mate.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. 2 minutes past 8. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through, of course, until 10 o'clock. The weather is pretty grim out there. There's an awful lot of floods still in place up and down the country. There's a lot of snow disruption going on the railway lines, on the train lines, as well as some of the airports too. We'll keep you updated with that. It's going to get a lot colder between now and the end of the week. And so if it's anything like yesterday, an awful lot of people didn't bother coming to work at all. London was pretty deserted, I have to say. There was hardly anybody on the tube. There was hardly anybody anywhere near any of the shops around here. There was certainly nobody in any of the restaurants around here or the bars. The whole place was absolutely like a ghost town. Extraordinary. 0344 499 1000. A lot of people very angry with Keir Starmer this morning. Karen is one of them from Southampton. She says repeatedly calling 80% of the population far right no longer has any impact or meaning. I'm not offended by it. I simply see it as demonstrating how ineffective and pathetic these politicians are. Well, Keir Starmer has upset an awful lot of people, though, in this country by telling them that they're jumping on a far-right bandwagon simply by wanting to see a proper investigation and a proper inquiry into the ghastly behaviour of Pakistani grooming and rape gangs in all sorts of parts of this country, as many as 50 different towns and cities. Thousands and thousands and thousands of young women affected by it, many of them just children, when they were raped and sodomised and horrendously treated, tortured and had terrible things done to them. Let's get a voice note from Ash.
Morning, Mike. Ash from Preston. Surely nobody in the Labour Party yesterday told Starmer to give that far-right line out. That is him doing improv, trying to speak to people, trying to communicate with people, and everybody knows he is the worst communicator, or one of the worst, that this country has ever seen. Great show. Cheers.
He simply cannot get it right, can he? I mean, he was out there yesterday supposedly selling his new idea about how to get the NHS working properly. He failed miserably at that. Most of the coverage this morning is minimal on what he said about the NHS, but front-page coverage of what he said about the far right. And that, for Keir Starmer, is a massive problem. Don't forget, this is a Labour government which has got something like a minus 54% approval rating. We're going to talk to Ryan Saby coming up very shortly, Deputy Political Editor at The Sun. Keir Starmer's actually written a piece in The Sun today in which he talks about how nothing is more important than dealing with child abuse, and nothing should be more important than that. But his words are weasel words because he doesn't want to have an inquiry, even though everybody knows the last inquiry was not a proper inquiry at all in 2022. The J inquiry, which he says he's now going to augment and he's now going to act upon, but it's the wrong kind of inquiry, and we'll tell you why. Coming up next, this is Morning Glory. Now, just before we talk to Ryan Saby, let me show you this. This is another aspect of what we might call a lawless Britain. Yesterday we showed you a bunch of guys running into an Apple store in Westfield over in Stratford. In Brent Cross, sorry, I tell a lie. This is Westfield in Stratford yesterday, which is the same kind of organisation, same kind of, you know, high-end sort of shopping centre where an awful lot of people go every single day of the week. Boxing Day, it was absolutely rammed with people. This, if you watch this video, will shock you. 4 teenage boys have been arrested, but basically there was a knife fight in the middle of the shopping centre, and it wasn't just a knife fight, it was a punch-up and a brawl with people who are actually holding machetes. If you look closely, if you're watching this on TV, you will see somebody pulling a machete out of their, what looked like their track pants, and waving it around. Then somebody else pulls one out as well. They're kicking each other, they're punching each other in the head. There's mass brawling going on. You can see security guards sort of walking around them, trying to sort of, I suppose, corral them and get them out of the building. But not one of the security guards, and I don't blame them for this really, is going in on them. Not one of the security guards is attempting to stop them from kicking and punching each other, and not one of the security guards attempts to stop one of them or the other of them from flailing around with about a foot-long machete. It's absolutely incredible. This is happening in one of our biggest shopping centres in the country, and it's happening on a regular basis. This happens to have been caught on camera because, of course, people film everything nowadays, and it is really frightening. Imagine if you're in that shopping centre having to watch that. Imagine if you've got your children with you, and you've got these out-of-control individuals, probably teenagers, basically trying to kill each other. Absolutely shocking. Shocking stuff. We'll come back to that in a little while. Let's talk to Ryan Saby, Deputy Political Editor of The Sun. Ryan, very good morning to you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Mike.
Good to see you. Keir Starmer's done it again, hasn't he? I mean, he's written a piece in The Sun today in which he says all the right things and says that, you know, he's determined to clamp down on all this terrible sexual abuse of children and horrible raping and grooming of kids in these towns and cities around Britain. But when he was talking yesterday, he said this.
And when politicians, and I mean politicians, who sat in government for many years, are casual about honesty, decency, truth and the rule of law, calling for inquiries because they want to jump on a bandwagon of the far right, then that affects politics, because a robust debate can only be based on the true facts.
Well, the true facts are yet to be established in many cases, Ryan, so why do you think he's so reluctant to actually order an inquiry?
I think there's a couple of things. I think, first of all, he's got this piece of legislation that Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, went to the Commons last night, and she said that if you are working with children, you're a teacher, you're a social worker, and you know about child sex offences, you will need to report them, and that will be, you'll face professional sanctions, you'll face criminal sanctions. So they feel like they're addressing that, but also I think they feel that what government needs to do now is actually implement the report from the Alexis J report and the recommendations from 2022. Now I think they feel like perhaps another local-led inquiry just won't be the right thing to do. However, you've got lots of people across the political spectrum who are saying it's now time to join the dots. There may well have been local investigations, but actually it needs a more sort of holistic, big picture view with this. So actually we may be able to learn from it. But at the moment, Number 10 and the government, the Home Secretary, are saying that we don't need this big national inquiry.
But except they do, because the old inquiry that he says they're going to action, with the J inquiry, as you mentioned, is not in any way a complete picture of what's been happening. Not only is it out of date because it was published in 2022, it didn't really look at the national prevalence of abuse gangs. It looks at 6 case study areas where there were no significant reports of grooming at all. It used the term Pakistani once. It relied on officials rather than the testimony of survivors. It mentions Rotherham only once. It doesn't mention Telford at all, and it only mentions Rochdale in relation to Cyril Smith. So it's a very incomplete picture of what the actual grooming gangs scenario really is. And they've also taken a statement from Maggie Oliver and chopped it by 2/3, so that an awful lot of what she said, and she's coming on this show later on today, very, very annoyed with what Keir Starmer said yesterday, you know, they haven't really addressed the grooming scandal. You know, the J report was more about kind of child abuse in general.
Yeah, I think this is going to be the problem for the government this week. Now, you obviously had the comments from Sir Keir Starmer yesterday. You're going to have more pressure from the likes from across cross parties from this week. Elon Musk as well is bound to weigh in again on this, and you just wonder by the end of the week whether the political pressure will just be too much, that Sir Keir Starmer just says that perhaps we do need to do this national inquiry, or perhaps row back from the position they're currently in. But one interesting thing that will happen in the House of Commons tomorrow is that the Conservatives have put down an amendment to say there should be a national inquiry. Now, what this will then mean is Labour MPs will have the choice to walk through the division lobbies with the Conservative MPs. Now, if they don't, it will look like they don't want a national inquiry. Now, it may well be that they have their own reasons for not voting with the Conservatives, but from a political point of view, it's a interesting tactic from Kemi Badenoch to put those Labour MPs under pressure.
Yes, I think so. And of course, he was referring yesterday to people like Kemi Badenoch when he said politicians who are jumping on a far-right bandwagon. I mean, she hasn't responded to that, but would you expect her to?
Yeah, I think so. And I think perhaps her response last night when she said that she was going to put down a measure to have this national inquiry was just her way of actually sort of intervening in this and actually putting Keir Starmer under pressure. But I would expect she's got 6 questions at Prime Minister's Questions tomorrow, and you expect this the topic that is that everyone is talking about that she will bring that up. Absolutely no doubt about it.
And I mean, like an awful lot of the things that have beset this new government and Keir Starmer, they haven't really been willing to move on any of the positions. You know, the winter fuel allowance that they were urged to put off for a year. The same with the VAT imposition on private schools. They were told to delay it for a little bit longer. The same goes for the price cap on electricity. They were asked to put one on. They didn't do it. They said they would. You know, they're not very good at sort of taking stock and thinking that they may have made the wrong decision. So would you expect the same to be the case here, where they've said they're not going to do an inquiry, so they just won't?
There may be some tinkering around the edges, but whether it's a full-blown national inquiry, let's wait and see. Now, I think one of the reasons why you're seeing all these big decisions and the government not moving on that is because they're at the start of that 5-year term in government, and I think they feel like they need to do the hard yards and do make all the tough decisions now. So whether it comes to winter fuel tax or national insurance, that they are the real difficult measures. And if you're going to do anything like that, it has to be in that first year or so, because the longer you leave it, the closer you get to the next election. That you have to try and get through the dirty work and the hard yards of government.
Yeah, but they keep saying that, Ryan, and in fact it doesn't really wash any longer with the people, because what we're seeing is not any kind of benefit at all. I mean, we've got a story this morning about the economy with service companies basically saying, look, we can't hire anyone, probably going to be letting people go, prices are going up, we're going to be spending billions more on national insurance. We've got, the Bank of England saying that the outlook's poor. We've got nobody anywhere saying that what Rachel Reeves has done in the budget is a good thing. So even the so-called benefit, and Wes Streeting was saying this on the weekend when he was doing the round, saying, people will look back on what we've done about winter fuel and what we've done about, going after farmers and all of that, and they'll realise it was the right thing to do. I don't think he's right about that.
I think one thing that the government has been beholden to is confidence, and I think leading up to that budget there was low confidence because the government were sort of almost talking the country down slightly. Many people would accuse them of that, and then you have the budget measures, whether that's national insurance or the farmers' tax, and that hits confidence again. So I think it has been very, very difficult for them, and growth particularly is going to be particularly poor over the next 4 or 5 years, and you do wonder where the light comes from here.
Yeah, you really do. Meanwhile, in one of the more bizarre developments of the day yesterday, in what was already a pretty bizarre day given what Keir Starmer said, Labour put out a really weird AI TikTok video featuring animals dressed in different sectors of the public service, such as the NHS and the police. But the song that they used was actually a song that had the most vile, ghastly lyrics. I don't know if you've had a chance to see them or look at them or hear them. It's a Brazilian rapper, apparently, talking about punching young girls, talking about, people's private parts. I mean, it was all about sort of abuse of women. I mean, given what's going on and the grooming gang scandal, it seems like a massive blunder, doesn't it?
Yeah, it seems like I don't know how that got through the sort of vetting procedure at Labour HQ there, but when I saw those lyrics yesterday, it's sort of taken aback, really. Certainly not one for as we obviously write in the newspaper, those words not going in there, and certainly not ones to read out here. But it does make you wonder what the thought process is and what the checking process is for something like that to actually see the light of day.
Yeah. Absolutely right. And let's talk about some of the other stuff around Downing Street at the moment. I mean, he's been away, obviously, for his holiday in Madeira. People were booing him there. He was jumping the queue for the toboggan, all the rest of it. He's back in situ now. It turns out that he's now redecorated a bit of Downing Street, we learned this morning, and that was that famously rather sort of badly thought-through press room that was dreamed up by Boris Johnson when he was still in charge, and Allegra Stratton, who was famously kind of caught out making jokes about lockdown and all of that. Apparently he didn't like the fact that the back walls were painted blue, so he's now painted them red.
Yeah, that's right. I'm actually going to. I think I should be heading in there today, so I'll be able to report back and show exactly what it's like. This is the room where Downing Street hold their twice daily briefings for journalists.
Yeah.
And it was blue, and now I think there's a shade of grey as well in there. I think as well. So. Yeah, I'll let you know and just see if it's value for money. But £80,000 does seem like a lot of money. Now, it is actually, I believe, an old courtroom that you go in. So some of the wood has to remain. So that may be why the costs have crept up. But I'll let you know.
No, very good. And finally, Tulip Siddiq has reported herself to the authorities, the parliamentary standards people, on the grounds that she thinks she might not have done anything wrong, but she just wants to be sure.
Yeah, no, exactly. This story has been brewing over the last few weeks, and it all goes back to the Treasury Minister Tulip Siddiq and her link to properties with links to her aunt, who was ousted as the Bangladesh Prime Minister sort of in the middle of last year. Now, she has reported herself to Lawrie Magnus, who we call the sort of sleaze watchdog, the ethics czar within government, and we'll just see what he comes up with. At the moment, it's a fact-finding mission, and if they feel fit to take the sort of the probe or the inquiry further, that they will do so. But I think the interesting thing on Tulip Siddiq is she's the anti-corruption minister. She was due to go to China later this week with the Chancellor on a trade delegation. Now, she won't go on that. She wants to be here to help the Sir Lawrie Magnus, who is that ethics advisor, and try and get this inquiry or get the early stages of that inquiry out the way, and so they can make a decision one way or the other to move to the next part.
But it's just more sleaze, isn't it? I mean, you can't get away from it with this government.
Yeah, it's one of those things where does it look good or not? And I think one of the key things about the ministerial code is may not be it's the perception of how these things look, and let's just see where Lawrie Magnus comes with this. No. But the fact that she referred herself to him shows that she wants this cleared up one way or the other as soon as possible.
Yeah, I would predict that she's out of a job by Easter, but we shall see. Good to talk to you, Ryan Saby. Thank you very much indeed, Deputy Political Editor at The Sun. Let's get a voice note from Mike.
I was listening to the radio about this national inquiry for these rape gangs. You can understand why they don't want to do it. If you have a local authority, it barely makes the headlines, and it goes no further than that local area. A national inquiry, well, that will consolidate everything in one place, and it will really show the extent of this horrendous problem. And yes, heads should roll.
Mike, you're absolutely right. And that's why they have to have an inquiry. They can't any longer hide behind the fact that there's already been an inquiry because it wasn't a thorough enough inquiry. Now, John in North Staffordshire says this on the Commons debate. Good morning, Mike. Great show. I didn't watch yesterday's debate on holding another election after 3.1 million people signed the petition. Did they set a date for a rerun so we can oust this joke of a government? Well, we'll find out coming up next. John Lamont's here. Also, Michael Westwood, the guy that started the petition, he's the owner of the Wagon and Horses pub. We'll get to it after this.
Saturday night, and you lucky people have got 4 of Talk's mightiest personalities in one room. I mean, what could go right? Me, Jeremy Kyle, Michael Graham, Julia, I'm Not Grumpy Tonight, Hartley Brewer and Kev O'Sullivan. Have you seen this?
Yeah.
What are you thinking? Jules is smiling.
I think they've made us all look a lot better than we actually look.
Well, I know what to ask for next time I go to the hairdresser.
I'd like to talk about Jez's nipples on his...
You got nipples? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's got nipples.
I didn't think you had nipples. I assumed you just came in an egg.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
8:24, welcome back to Morning Glory with you all the way through until 10 o'clock. Of course, Julie Hartley-Brewer will be on between 10 and 1 this morning. Jeremy Carl's back, of course, at 4. Ian Collins in between the two. We're going to talk now to Michael Westwood, who started that petition all those weeks ago for the Labour government to have another election because we're so displeased with what they've done so far. He's the owner of the Wagon and Horses pub. Also, John Lamont, MP, Conservative MP for the Scottish Borders. He said this yesterday about a catalogue of broken promises.
Labour promised not to increase national insurance. Broken. Labour promised not to raise taxes on farmers. Broken. Labour promised not to scrap the winter fuel payment. Broken. Labour promised to compensate waspy women. Broken. Labour promised to protect single-sex spaces. Broken. Labour promised no cliff edge in the North Sea oil and gas sector. Broken. Labour promised to cut energy bills. Broken. Labour promised £150 million war chest for the Scotland office. Broken. Now, wherever anyone stands on any of the individual policy issues, there is no doubt this Labour government has not kept its word. The broken promises to voters that they made not once, not twice, but hundreds of times.
Broken promises indeed. Failure to compose themselves into what they said they would be, which was a party of grown-ups, a government that was ready, the government that was actually fully costed, a government that was indeed completely and utterly ready to hit the ground running in every single department. That was what they all said. That was what Keir Starmer said before the election. And now look at us. We're completely and utterly bereft, up the creek, as it were, without a paddle. Let's talk to Michael Westwood, who started that petition all those weeks ago. Michael, very good morning to you.
Morning, thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming on. I mean, must have taken you, I'm sure you've been asked this question many times, but it must have taken you by surprise to see the petition reaching 3.1 million. Were you able to watch any of the proceedings yesterday?
Yeah, I was sat in the gallery, listening to everything. Quite entertaining, really. You had a real good turnout on the Labour side, but those there just to scream and shout about the 14 years of Tory government and the 22 billion black hole rather than actually talk about the debate itself.
Right. Yeah, they don't really get it, do they? Because, I mean, I wonder whether you've hit on something here, that if a government does get in on what a lot of people believe to be false pretences, you know, because they did promise all of those things that John Lamont said they haven't done. They also said they were ready to govern. They said they were grown-ups. They were going to bring, you know, proper, you know, grown-up policies back to the running of the country. And it's been a complete shambles, isn't it?
It has, yeah. It's been a complete utter disaster for them, and it seems to continue. Rather than Keir Starmer yesterday addressing the 3 million people that currently live in the country that have signed the petition, he's too worried about Elon Musk and what he's got to say over in America, which I think just about shows where his priorities are at the minute.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I mean, were you satisfied at the end of the day yesterday? I mean, I know you just said that they didn't really talk about the things that you'd want them to talk about, but no, I mean, you've got your little place in history. It's not a bad little thing to have done.
No, it's not bad at all. It was frustrating to sit there and not be able to voice your opinion in the room with them. I thought Conservatives, Lib Dems, Nigel Farage, as part of Reform, I thought they got my argument across extremely well. It was just disappointing to the Labour side that they're not able to sit back and look at themselves and say, yeah, actually, do you know what, you're right, we're going to put this right going forward. Instead, they just want to play the blame game, which it felt like sitting in an argument between two sets of children, to be truthful, at the back of the room.
That is the problem, isn't it? When you see them up close, you sort of expect better, really, don't you? But you don't, you don't get it. Well, Michael, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed, and thank you for starting the petition in the first place. Let's talk to John Laban, who you saw there earlier, just decrying the various promises that were made by the Labour government, which they have failed to bring to the fore. It seems extraordinary, John. A lot of people, very good morning to you, a lot of people say to me now, you know, there should be some mechanism by which, if a government or even a politician, a single MP is elected on what turns out to be a completely false premise, there should be some sanction, should there not, whether it's another election or whether it's some kind of recall. But they really have taken the mickey out of the electorate, it seems to me.
Thanks, Mike. I mean, I think the problem that the Labour government have is when any new government comes in, there's a degree of expectation they're going to have a period of goodwill and positivity and really driving forward their election manifesto, the changes that they were proposing at the time of the election. But because there's been this narrative of doom and gloom and all these broken promises, I think the big problem that the Labour Prime Minister have and the Labour government have, a bit like Nick Clegg had back in 2010, people just give up on them and they lose trust. And come the next election, which is the next opportunity that people will have to cast a proper verdict on Keir Starmer and his Labour ministers, is they just won't give them the time of day because they will have broken that trust, that bond of trust, because of the outcome of this election and how they treated the electorate, all the broken promises and not keeping their word. That they'll find it very, very hard to convince people as to what they're proposing to do next time. Yeah, because a lot of the barefaced lies, that's what I'm going to call them, that they spoke about before the election, before they were in power, they must have known that they weren't going to do those things. And we kept being told by Rachel Reeves, for example, that everything was fully costed, that everything was going to be done very, very straightforwardly. It would all be very transparent. They talked about how, you know, they knew what was going on. They were ready to rock and roll. There was no question of them discovering some gap in the market that they didn't realise was there. And then suddenly all we heard about was this £22 billion black hole, which they knew about. No, exactly. I mean, I think you're spot on, Mike. I mean, as Rishi Sunak said ahead of the election, we feared that we're going to put up taxes, despite what Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves said, and here we are. They've put up taxes in an eye-watering way. Billions of pounds being taken off employers, a huge tax on jobs. They promised to cut energy bills. They promised to protect WASPy women. They promised to protect family farms, and all those areas, plus many, many more. They have completely U-turned and betrayed the voters, and voters are not stupid. Voters remember, and the Conservative Party was rightly punished in the election. Voters have given up on us. We need to change, and we need to understand what the message was that voters gave to us. But this new Labour government have in many ways fallen into the same trap, and voters will not forgive them. Yeah, and I mean, should there be some form of mechanism, do you think? I mean, is it possible to introduce something, maybe not in this Parliament, but sometime into the future, so that all politicians are in some way at least punished if they just make stuff up, which never ever happens? I mean, there is the recall petition, the recall mechanisms now for individual MPs who are caught to break the law or do other things which are deemed to be serious enough to warrant a recall petition. But there is no other mechanism unless Parliament, unless MPs collectively decide to pass a vote of no confidence in the government and bring the government down. There is no mechanism to call an early election. As I said earlier, we should look back to what happened to Nick Clegg back in 2010 when he broke that big promise on tuition fees, and voters took voters a decade probably to properly forgive the Lib Dems for breaking that significant promise. And I think the challenge for Labour and the Prime Minister is voters are going to take a long time to forgive them for this catalogue of broken promises. I think that's right. Good to talk to you, John Laban. Thank you very much indeed, MP for the Scottish Borders, a Conservative, of course. Let's get a voice note from Alan.
Morning, Mike. With the NHS, if you're an immigrant, you go to the front of the queue, right? If you're a smoker and you're obese, you go to the back of the queue. But if I'm an immigrant that smokes and is obese, I don't know where I should join the queue, mate. Can you help? Well, I mean, I can help. Basically, if you don't want to be thrown to the back of the NHS queue, go private. I think that's about the only advice I could give anybody, by the way. The point about all of this is that
the NHS isn't going to change anytime soon. Keir Starmer's there with his sleeves rolled up. We watched him yesterday trying to make out that all was rosy in the garden, that suddenly we're going to introduce this new app, which is not a new app, and everybody's going to be better off. Suddenly he's going to introduce new appointment procedures so that you can see people more quickly. That's not going to happen. He's going to supposedly reduce the number of needless opportunities for people to see the doctor. That's not going to happen. They're going to open these hubs, which are already open. So that's not really going to happen either. There's really nothing that Keir Starmer said yesterday about introducing new forms of NHS treatment that are going to happen. Nothing's going to change. And their best ambition is to make things better in 5 years' time. So that by 4.5 years, in 2029, you might be able to see a doctor within 18 weeks of booking one. Really? That's the best they've got? For heaven's sake. 0344 499 1000 is the number. Alan in Merseyside says this: Mike, I was shocked to see my town St Helens listed on the sex grooming list. That's why we need a national inquiry. I've never dreamt it was going on in my hometown. And Keith in Oswestry sends a very nice picture of his back garden, saying it's been a bit snowy here in North Shropshire. My driveway is a bit steep, but yet the postie is managing to deliver the mail. And I'm sure he's not on £80,000 a year salary. Yeah, well, he's not driving a train either, because if he was, he wouldn't be walking up your pathway, would he, in order to get on it. This is Morning Glory. Coming up next, we're going to be talking to Maggie Oliver, former detective constable, of course, at Greater Manchester Police, a woman who knows pretty much everything there is to know about the ins and outs of the grooming scandal, the rape crimes that were carrying on over the course of decades in Manchester, in Rochdale, in Rotherham, in Oldham, in all other parts of the country, like Telford as well, in Oxford. Unbelievable records that she kept, unbelievable reports that she's made, incredible work that she has done on this course of ghastliness that has wreaked havoc for young women in this country, for thousands of young women whose lives have been ruined. We're going to hear from Maggie Oliver coming next, right here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 8:37. It is the time. We're here all the way through until 10 o'clock, of course. This from Carol, who says, having just seen the footage of the feral gangs brandishing machetes in a shopping centre, security guards should be trained in the use of tasers. Yeah, I think that's right. And Stuart says, Mike, has anyone thought to ask Keir what his definition of far-right actually is? I think his answer will be anyone who disagrees with anything I say or think. Well, we've seen this before, haven't we? And this is the problem. Tony says, morning, Mike. Tony in Stoke-on-Trent here. I'm absolutely sick to the back teeth of this government. So now, because I'm upset about the amount of illegal immigrants coming over on boats, because I'm upset about a knife attack on school kids in Southport, because I'm upset about a rape gang hurting and raping young girls, I'm a far-right racist. And if I tweet about being upset, I'll get thrown into prison. This isn't a country to be proud of anymore. It's a dictatorship. No wonder he's cozying up to China. And I think an awful lot of people would share some of the really, really angry comments that have been made this morning about Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of this country, who's basically accused anyone who wants to do a proper inquiry into what happened in these terrible, terrible places in the north of England, in the Midlands, all over England and all over parts of this country in more than 50 towns and cities. Anyone who wants a proper inquiry into that is jumping on a far-right bandwagon. That's what he said. Maggie Oliver's here, former Detective Constable, Greater Manchester Police, of course, a woman who knows probably more about this terrible scandal than anybody else, a woman who was actually quoted in the last J report, although what she wrote was curtailed by 2/3. She's a woman who's been constantly attacked for some of the things that she said, and she's now here to talk to us about how dreadful the situation is right now. Maggie, very good morning to you. Welcome.
Good morning, Mike.
Thanks so much for joining us. I know you've been very busy in the last few days, and since this story has been resurrected by Elon Musk, which I think has been a great service to not just to the UK, but to the victims and to the world, really, as well, because I think only sometimes when other people from other countries look upon what we've done can we really realise how ashamed we should be of it.
Yeah, I have to agree, Mike. You know, Elon Musk entering into the fray has brought a spotlight, an international spotlight onto this, which has, well, actually, even the statement last night from Yvette Cooper, you know, announcing the implementation of all these recommendations, which have sat on a shelf for 2-3 years, that in itself is a little bit of progress. They should have been implemented straight after the J inquiry. I've been quite outspoken about my criticisms of the grooming gang section of that inquiry. It was painfully inadequate. I would even say it was a whitewash.
Yes.
It was less than 2 weeks. All senior police officers and social workers and council bosses were allowed to give evidence. One victim, half a day. Myself and all the other non-institutional witnesses were forbidden from speaking, statements decimated. We were all silenced. So none of the towns and cities, you know, Huddersfield, Rochdale, Rotherham, Oxford, Telford, not one of them included. So I would say that public inquiry was a missed opportunity in the way that so many other things have been, Mike. And so I welcome the spotlight back on it. I'm trying to stay out of the politics of it because this topic has been my life for 20 years and I know it inside out, and there's many layers and threads running through it.
But isn't it fair to say that the politicians are the ones that are making it political? It shouldn't be political. You know, you can say that, you know, some Labour councils are more to blame than other Tory councils. You can say all of those things. But at the end of the day, it's the politicians who are sort of getting into each other's, you know, reputations. It was Keir Starmer, after all, yesterday, who referred specifically to politicians jumping on a far-right bandwagon.
Yeah, I mean, not only myself, but many of the victims and survivors that we support in the Maggie Oliver Foundation are raging about that comment. I am not a far-right extremist. You know, I'm a woman who served 16 years in the police, and I have put my life on the line to help amplify the voices of those victims who have been failed. That is really shows how out of touch with the public mood he is, and how he's deflecting from the issues that run through this conversation. You know, we have to have the conversation. Race is absolutely front and centre of this particular kind of crime. It doesn't mean that all Muslims are paedophiles, just like having the Archbishop of Canterbury resign over abuse in the church means that every priest is a paedophile, or every Christian is a paedophile. But I don't become defensive when we're talking about abuse in the church or abuse in, Jeffrey Epstein. Abuse is abuse, and children are the victims, and we can't let political correctness affect those conversations. Misogyny sadly runs right through the community that I'm talking about, and many of the women and children in that society, as I know from my experience in the police, are also sexually abused, but they are unable to speak out about it either. So we have a duty to air these topics, and the only way I know of bringing change is to look at the truth, to look at the facts. And when you know that nobody gathers the data around these grooming gang prosecutions, nobody records ethnicity, nobody asks questions, we need to have these conversations, and we need facts and we need action.
Right. And this is another thing that Keir Starmer said yesterday. He talked about, you have to have the facts. Well, we don't have the facts, because the facts do not appear, as you say, in that J report. Most of what you said wasn't included. They mentioned the word Pakistani once. They don't mention Telford at all. They mention Rochdale in relation to Cyril Smith. It's not about grooming gangs, this report. So the idea that that is somehow good enough for Keir Starmer and he doesn't need to do another inquiry is nonsense, isn't it?
I think that the issue, Mike, for me is, you announce another public inquiry. The J inquiry, it was 7 years, 2 weeks was dedicated to the grooming gangs,
right.
£200 million. What was the intention behind it? I would say we've had a cover-up because all the victims of the grooming gangs were excluded from that inquiry.
Yeah.
So the question has to be, what is meant by a public inquiry? I would say that if you look at the local reports that have been done, I've been heavily involved with Augusta in Manchester, with the Rochdale inquiry, both of which Burnham put together. We've had the big one in Rotherham. I don't want to see another 7 years of delays. I don't want to see chief constables and senior social workers paraded out to hijack these public inquiries. It's victims, it's abusers, it's people who have no axe to grind, like me, like the Centre for Women's Justice, like Parents Against Child Exploitation. They are the people whose voices should be front and centre. And I fear that another public inquiry, if it is just another tick in a box, will push back reform. We need action. We all know the facts around this. We need them plainly on a piece of paper. I don't need another public inquiry to tell me what is going on.
No, of course you don't. But many people might want to know what you know. And, of course, because they didn't include it in that report, do you know, for example, what they left out and why did they leave out what you said?
The way I look at it is that I believe it was very, very carefully controlled in order to manage the conversation. As you rightly said, Mike, my own statement was decimated from 50 pages to, I think it was 18. I was sat there for 2 weeks waiting to give evidence, and we were all denied that opportunity. The one victim that was spoken to was given 2 hours. She wasn't even allowed to go to the toilet because they said they had no time to hear her evidence if she did. All these things, there is so much to talk about, but we have to get over the taboo of speaking about it, because without really digging deep and facing up to these problems, it is not going to go away, Mike. And I always bring into the conversation that victims of violence against not just women and girls, but victims of sexual violence receive a very poor service from the criminal justice system on all levels. It's not just grooming gang victims. So we need all of these factors. What are we wanting to do as a country? Are we wanting to be a country that just deals with the easy crime? You put something on Facebook, you're in front of a court within a couple of days and in prison for 3 years. For me, that's not justice. When I see victims of horrendous rape waiting 7 years, can you believe that the Augusta review reported in 2020, they were forced in Greater Manchester to reopen that case, and 7 years after the victims were reapproached, we are still waiting for a single charge. So these things are affecting victims and people today. These are not problems of the past, but there are many levels in this. But the truth and getting to the facts and not tiptoeing around the racial elements of this crime is, I would say, unforgivable.
Yeah.
Without doing that, we are never going to attack it. You have to have the truth and be honest about it before you can even begin to change the way things are working.
And what do you think Keir Starmer's afraid of here? Why do you think he doesn't want to have a second inquiry?
I think the issue is why has he refused, and not just him, a whole series of politicians and public figures have refused to accept that when we're looking at grooming gangs, the abusers are predominantly Pakistani Muslim men and the victims are very vulnerable white children. I think that is the issue. And I mean, I've tried to stay out of the politics, but I do think that there has been a fear of being accused of being a racist. And by not talking about it, we've allowed that, we've just abandoned the children. Keir Starmer, as Director of Public Prosecutions, as everybody now knows, because Nazir Afzal announced it, the Home Office in his time, in 2008, sent out a circular to all police forces saying that these grooming gangs, that this kind of abuse, the children were making, they were complicit in their abuse, that they were presenting. Now, that sent out a clear message that we do not attack this kind of abuse. And for me, that is unforgivable.
Yeah.
So there are so many layers in it, Mike, but we have to tackle it head on. And I'm grateful that the international spotlight has fallen on it, because I've been outraged about this since the day I heard. Of course you have.
And every time you and I speak, Maggie, which is quite frequently, you tell me that it's still going on. And we don't get any reference point of that from Keir Starmer. Yesterday, he could have said, we're aware that it's still a problem. He didn't say that.
Because, you listen. I mean, I heard interviews at the weekend saying that these are problems of the past. I think my value is that because I am involved on a daily basis in my charity, speaking to victims today, I do know that it is still going on. I'm not talking about the past. They are problems of the past, but they are also problems of the present. What I would like to say, though, Mike, because I don't want to be all doom and gloom, I think because we have got heightened public awareness, it is less easy to fob off the victims. At my foundation, we are building some bridges with good people within the police. We communicate, we advocate for victims, and I do think we need to do more of that as a society. We need to find ways of working together. We need to be honest. We need facts, and we need action. But this is most certainly not a problem of the past, and we have to get over the fact that it's seen as a taboo to speak the truth. It's not a far-right extremist view. It is facts, and you only have to speak to the thousands of victims who are outraged, actually, by what Keir Starmer said yesterday.
Yeah, and you said there was a cover-up. Do you think there are people who should still be prosecuted for taking part in that cover-up?
When we've spoken before, Mike, I have said that I want to see at least one senior police officer, a chief constable, and I've got a few in my mind who I would like to see charged with gross criminal neglect, criminal charges, misconduct malfeasance in a public office. They knew what was going on. They closed down these cases. They abandoned the children, and they are criminally liable, in my opinion. I really believe that if we had a prosecution of a senior public official, we would get change overnight, because every other public official in office now would not want to be in that same position. We need changes to the police complaints system. It is not independent. The IOPC, the Independent Office for Police Conduct, is not truly independent. They received 80,000 complaints last year. 8,000 went back to them because the complaints go directly back to the police force. 8,000 of those complaints went back. They were only able to look at 3,000. We don't have independent scrutiny. We don't have people who really want to listen to what's going on. They want to protect the organisations, and that is a big part of what's wrong, Mike.
Yes, and Starmer has written a piece in The Sun today saying that, you know, he doesn't believe that the protection of organisations should ever be more important than the protection of children. But it's easy to say that, but he doesn't appear to believe it in his own mind.
You know what, if he believes that, tell him to overhaul the police complaint system. That's what we need to do. We need truly independent people scrutinising whether it's mistakes, cover-ups, whatever. And also, the other thing I would say is that when police officers, senior police officers, are found to have been neglectful, they should be compelled to be interviewed by the authorities. At the moment, they can simply refuse to give a statement, refuse to be interviewed. And that, for me, again, is another thing that is wrong. So if you know, that there is a lot of action that can be taken. I would like to see action and not words. I'm sick and tired of promises that don't come to fruition. I think the first step must be to implement the 20 recommendations, including a Minister for Children, because it's incredible we don't have that in the Cabinet. That won't resolve everything, but it is one start. Can you believe that we still have pain compliance of children, which is legally acceptable? You know, that was another recommendation. I think the National Abuse Inquiry in relation to the grooming gangs was woefully inadequate. It was not transparent. It was not thorough. It should have been an inquiry on its own. But we've wasted many, many years. I'm just nervous of wasting another 7 years for something that leads to nothing.
If you could give a message to Keir Starmer now, just, you know, as if you were speaking to him, what would it be?
It would be do your job. Make sure that victims of abuse get the service that they deserve. And if that needs investment and training and prioritising this crime, do it. You know, don't be locking people up for saying naughty things on Facebook and social media. Let the police concentrate on the serious crime. If we can't deal with serious crime, we are a country that's falling apart, and we are increasingly becoming a country that focuses on the easy targets. We are criminalising victims rather than focusing on their abusers. And for me, that is inconceivable in the 21st century. I believe in protecting children, and I think as a society, we have nothing that is more important than that principle. And I would like to see Keir Starmer step up to the mark and really act, not cover up, not pretend the criticisms come from far-right extremists. They don't. They come from victims and survivors and people like me. But the victims and survivors have had their lives destroyed by negligence from public bodies repeatedly. We need urgent reform, we need urgent change, and we need urgent action, investment and prioritising of these crimes, in my opinion.
Yeah, Maggie, great to talk to you as ever. Thank you so much for spending the time with us. And we'll try our best to push for Keir Starmer to do all of those things that you've just said he should do. Do your job. Those are the words that Keir Starmer should remember from that interview with Maggie Oliver, a woman who knows inside out what has gone wrong in this country when it comes to grooming gangs and the failure to punish the people responsible for them. This is Talk.
UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. Coming up in the next hour, William Clouston is here from the SDP. We'll find out from him what he makes of this grooming scandal and the growing calls for Keir Starmer to do something. Just heard from Maggie Oliver there to say, just do your job. That would be a beginning, at least, if he actually did that, instead of calling everybody far right and telling everyone that they're jumping on some kind of bandwagon because they want to see the safeguarding of our children in this country from the ghastly threat of grooming gangs from Pakistan. It's a shambles what's going on. We'll be talking more about that in the next hour. This is Morning Glory. We'll see you after the news.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. 2 minutes past 9. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until 10 o'clock, of course. 4 glorious hours of Morning Glory every single weekday now from 6 a.m. Monday to Friday. Julia Hartley-Brewer will be here just before 10 to tell us what's coming up on her show. Yesterday, as we handed over to Julia, she was preparing to see Keir Starmer unveil his latest plans for the NHS. That all went a bit wrong because, of course, hardly any of the papers this morning have covered what he wants to do with the NHS, mostly because none of it is particularly inspiring. Most of it is something that's already happening. Much of it is something that won't happen. Many of the recommendations that he supposedly is going to make in terms of changes to the NHS won't kick in for another 4 years anyway. So nobody's really buying the NHS reform that Sir Keir Starmer is selling. Far more of the papers are interested in what he had to say about the grooming gangs, as he basically did it again. He did exactly what he did in the summer and referred to anyone who wants to see a proper inquiry into the grooming gangs and the rape of our young people of this country the young women, thousands of them, attacked by Pakistani grooming gangs. He calls them all far right. He says you're jumping on a far right bandwagon, whether you're a politician, whether you're a commentator, whether you are somebody just out there walking up and down the streets of this country. If you want to see an inquiry into this disgusting, disgraceful, terrible event that has still not just happened in the past, but is still happening now, you are some kind of far-right thug. It's absolutely unbelievable. William Clouston's here with me. We're interested to see what he's got to say on behalf of his own party, the SDP. Also, of course, we will talking some more about what Maggie Oliver had to say. She, of course, is the woman who knows more about grooming gangs than anybody in the country. She says Keir Starmer just needs to do his job, and he needs to completely overhaul the way the police complaints scenario works and the way that people are investigated when complaints are made about them. 0344 499 1000 is the number. We'll also have a look at that incident in Westfield, the big shopping centre in Stratford in East London, where men, boys, teenagers, whatever you wish to call them, are actually arming themselves with machetes and fighting in front of families in broad daylight in a shopping centre. We'll bring you more on that as we go through this particular show. Keep your calls coming, keep your voice notes coming. 0344 499 1000. This is Morning Glory. Let's get it on. Ben says this: Hi Mike, why doesn't Kemi and Nigel state that they will commission a nationwide grooming report should they get into power next time? Wouldn't that put extra pressure on two-tier Keir and back him into a corner? Just a thought. Keep up the good work. And John in Wallington says, Mike, God bless Maggie Oliver, the whole country is behind her. And I think that's absolutely right. William Clouston is here with us. William, very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike.
Happy New Year. Just before we get onto the subject of Maggie Oliver and the grooming scandal and Keir Starmer and his far-right accusations, let me just show you this Westfield footage here. You can see it if you're watching now. This is during the middle of the day. You can see the sunlight shining in there through the windows. This is a group of kids, probably teenagers, probably 20 to 30 of them, fighting, punching, kicking each other. At various stages, you see a couple of security staff not really doing anything, just kind of walking around. We can't really blame them. They don't want to get in the middle of it. At some point or other, a machete gets pulled out. Two people there fighting with machetes, armed with these things which are about a foot long. God knows how you deal with something like that if you're a security guard on minimum wage. The security guards are just really walking around them, hoping against hope that they don't get stabbed, presumably. Let's get a voice note on this from Gaz.
Just watched that video of those security guards basically doing nothing with those youths in that shopping centre and that knife fight. I wouldn't wade in either because it's not worth getting attacked or stabbed or slashed. But why can't they arm them with something like indelible ink spray, or I know you can't have pepper spray in this country, but, you know, something that makes a really loud noise, anything just to disperse them.
You would think something like that, or throw a net over them or something. I mean, this is going on far too often, I'm afraid, in our shopping centres. We had a video yesterday of a load of kids just going into an Apple store and stealing a load of stuff and running out.
They've got no fear, have they, Mike?
No,
none at all. And that's the product of basically 40 years of liberalism and softness on people. I mean, basically, when you mentioned this event at Westfield, I thought you were talking about Brent Cross, but actually it's happening daily, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
It's ridiculous.
It really is. I mean, I was talking to somebody yesterday about Turkey, a place where a lot of British people are now sort of going on holiday an awful lot, and some people have got houses and homes and stuff there, and they said there's no crime there because when somebody does something, they get very severely punished.
There's no crime in Singapore.
No.
And it's safe.
They get incredibly severely punished. You don't have to worry about your phone being stolen, you don't have to worry about your car being nicked, because people don't break the law because they're frightened.
You need a power shift. Yeah. And the streets, and in these cases, the shopping centres, these kids are walking around, they've got no fear, you can see it. Yeah. Look, I was appalled by the robbing of that store at Brent Cross. Yeah. And what it will mean is that decent people, families, won't want to go to these places. No. And the whole model of the shopping centre will fail.
And it all falls into dereliction, and that's what you see. Let me play you what Keir Starmer said. I know you've probably seen it already, but let's play it just to remind those of you who haven't seen it. This is Keir Starmer's answer to a question yesterday about the grooming gangs.
And when politicians, and I mean politicians, who sat in government for many years, are casual about honesty, decency, truth and the rule of law, calling for inquiries because they want to jump on a bandwagon of the far right, then that affects politics, because a robust debate can only be based on the true facts.
The true facts. Now, I don't know what true facts he means, because facts surely are facts. Whether they're true makes them a fact.
By their nature, He's made a big mistake here. Calling people that are calling for an inquiry or raising this as an issue, a national scandal, calling them far-right, big mistake. Give you an example. When the SDP stood in South Yorkshire mayoral elections twice, and we did very well, saved our deposit last time, got 8%, beat the Lib Dems and the Greens in 3 divisions. We did our work. We always do our work. So we went to see Jane Senior, who was the main whistleblower in Rotherham. She's written the book. She was subject to spurious allegations and inquiries. She was impeded right from the start. She was a social worker that looked after prostitutes working in a nighttime situation. She protected them, and then she got into the whistleblowing from there. And at every single stage, she was impeded. And you know what she is? She's not a far-right person. You know what she is? She's a Labour member. They treat their own people like this. If they raise the issue, they vilify them and stamp on it.
Well, they did that to Simon Danchuk, didn't they? I mean, he was told that not to get involved in it.
And Cryer.
And Anne Cryer as well. They suddenly found themselves out of a job.
But I want to, I mean, a lot's been to, and you've covered it really well, but I want to talk about what is at the root of this. And every single interview I see in a progressive that's interviewed about this outrage, you get the same shifting in the seat, the same sort of uncomfortableness. And what's causing it? The cause of this is something that Ben Cobley calls the liberal left system of diversity. They have promoted an idea, Mike, for the last 20 years, that society can be broken into 2 groups, oppressors and victims. You and I, obviously, as white males, we are oppressors. It's simplistic garbage. And when you think like that, when something like this happens, which is a white working-class girls, and the perpetrators are a minority group, their brains just frazzle. They can't deal with the fact that the perpetrators are a minority group, who is one of their favoured groups, and the victims are white girls. Bear in mind that we've had 20 years of government programmes telling people on courses in institutions to check their white privilege, to be aware of their whiteness, and if you vilify people like that, you can't deal with the fact that they can be victims too. And
also to question your own sort of cultural heritage, that somehow it might be wrong.
Of course. But you wonder why, right? You wonder why Jane Senior had difficulty getting the police in South Yorkshire to deal with this properly. Why? Because for years the police have been vilified as institutionally racist. And then when something like this happens, they think, what the hell do we do? Oh, we can't, we better be careful. The only solution to this, Mike, is to treat every citizen on a par. Impartiality. And if someone does something wrong, you've got to nail them for it.
But this is why Two-Tier Keir, as we call him, gets so upset when he gets accused of being Two-Tier Keir, because he doesn't think it's true. But it's very clearly true.
It's in his mind.
He's doing it again. He did it in the summer. He started calling people far-right. People got locked up for the most ridiculous things, right? Then many of them are still in prison, suffering at the hands of Keir Starmer's 2-tier justice system. There's no question in my mind that the judges were told to be very harsh on these people. There's no question in my mind that the people who pleaded guilty were told to plead guilty because that would make it better for them. It wasn't better, it was worse. We also know that the grooming gangs is an embarrassment to Keir Starmer.
Well, it's an embarrassment.
And to Labour, and he doesn't want to talk about it.
He doesn't, but what it does is, Mike, this is why you've got to get the theory right. What it's about is that their sort of model of multiculturalism, which is failing in the mill towns. It is failing because it's very highly
failing everywhere.
Segregated. These are parallel societies. And to police societies that you're not from is very, very difficult. It's always been difficult. But they literally every single interview that you see them being completely discombobulated by what is actually happening. And I would ask you a question. It's a provocative question, I admit. But if the victims had been one of the favoured minority groups and the perpetrators had been a white group, do you think we'd have heard nothing else but that?
Of course.
We'd have, and instead their reaction is to try and subdue it, try and bury it, pretend it didn't happen. But it's a national scandal, and I think that's a national scandal. Until we get a reset and start treating people fairly and impartially, no matter who they are, we're never going to make any progress.
But these are the same people who have been telling us for years and years and years and years that those who come here on the small boats illegally are fleeing, terrible horrors at home and fleeing war zones and, fleeing
France,
terrible persecution in their home countries, right? And we can't ever question question any of them. There's no suggestion that any of them might be actually terrorists, or they might be, you know, criminals, or they might be coming here for nefarious purposes to take part in criminal activity. We can't do any of that. But they've all gone very quiet suddenly, because now the Labour government is in, and they're saying, well, we have to deport some people, even though they're not really doing it. But suddenly now, also, and I saw this with his announcement on the NHS yesterday, he's effectively privatising bits of the NHS. Nobody's saying a word.
Well, that's not new. I mean, Blair...
but Blair is not Starmer. Let's face it. These are the same people who would have said absolutely blue murder if Rishi Sunak had started talking about it.
Yeah, but I think it's important we govern with evidence, on the basis of evidence, and Rupert Lowe has done a great job trying to get evidence on criminality, disproportionate criminality, among certain groups. One of those groups is the migrant groups. And we don't check these people coming in. They decide to come here, and the human rights law protects them, and then they have most of them stay, right? So they're deciding to come here. We have no say in it at all. We find out that some of those groups are disproportionately criminal. The Albanian, off the scale. How can you? How can one community have so much criminality in it? A sensible government would say we're not going to have this. And change what is happening. And they're not doing it.
And ban Albanians from ever coming to the country.
It's a rational, evidence-based
policy. And take all of the Albanians who are in prison, who account for the largest number of foreign prisoners in our prison system, and deport them all.
But they, again, get the theory. Why is it happening? The problem is that they can't... There's no amount of suffering, basically. And this is suffering. Because if you look at the criminality, it's 130,000 arrests by foreigners last year. This is people getting attacked and hurt and raped and killed in some cases. The problem with the progressive is that the progressive, there's no amount of pain that they're prepared to put on the society to fulfil their little dreams of utopia. They want this wonderful society, and they cannot see
what do you think's
what's in front
behind
of
it.
them.
It's a kind of derangement.
It's derangement,
but how do they get to that place where, I mean, you and I are talking here as two rational human beings, I think. I don't think either one of us would be described by anyone except for Keir Starmer as far right. You know, we've grown up in this country. I grew up in a mostly white neighbourhood, which was North London, as it was then. It's still relatively white neighbourhood. It hasn't changed much, but there's a lot of foreigners now who have come in. That's part of the course. You know, I went to school in a relatively white school. I think we had one or two black kids in the school. I went through most of my life knowing people from Britain, right? I went and lived in America. New York was a very open place to me. I couldn't believe quite how many people were there. It was a melting pot. But everybody who was there was American. It didn't matter whether they were Russians or whether they were Israelis or where they came from. They were all Americans, right? That's not the case here. The people who are now here, who occupy the city that I live in, who are from other countries, and it's got nothing to do with their skin colour. None of them are British.
Cultural.
They don't want to be British.
But we don't.
Spanish don't want to be British.
We don't.
The French don't want to be British.
But we don't ask. There's no. I sometimes tease people when I'm debating them on what is the policy. You know, how well has your integration policy gone over the last 40 years? Well, there isn't one, and there never has been one. What you've got is complete reckless neglect. Let's try this experiment and see how it works out. And it doesn't work.
And it's the same all over Europe. Every single Western European country's got the same problem.
And as I say, look at the interviews. Look at some of the interviews recently about this appalling gang rape outrage. Look at the interviews of the progressives that are trying to bat it back, and they're discombobulated. They can't. Their world is sort of falling apart, and it's like sort of last stages of Marxist. You know, it's when their system literally collapses. It's over.
All they can say is that but by far and away the biggest number of people who are sexually abused by people that they know in their own family. So this doesn't count.
No, but that's
that's not the point.
Mike, no, but honestly, you're a journalist. That type of journalism should be shamed out of existence.
I agree.
Because if you don't understand proportionality and a group that's overrepresented. Lots of groups are overrepresented and underrepresented in different categories of crime. In this particular category, a particular group is massively overrepresented. To deny that is, you've got to be thick to deny that.
Well, Starmer is one of those thick people, and unfortunately, so far, his MO seems to be that he doesn't change his mind. He doesn't admit he's made a mistake. If he says he's not going to do an inquiry here, he probably won't. And I think that will be his downfall.
He won't do one because one of the it's funny, I was doing an interview with someone yesterday talking about, it was a long 2-hour podcast. They're talking about how the Labour Party differs from the Tories and how the Tories are really quite you might find this odd, but it's sort of innocent, really. They're sort of unworldly. They're sort of, you know, what's this woke thing? You know, sort of walking around, hello birds. Remember Fotherington Thomas? You know, hello birds, hello sky. Actually, the Labour Party's hard as nails. They are hard as nails. There won't be an inquiry. They'll just bludgeon this out. They don't care.
Right. But he will find, I think, that whether it's this or whether it's the next thing that he doesn't do right, I still say, and I've been saying it since July, he won't last. He just cannot. I don't see it.
You're persuading me of that.
I think something will happen. I still don't know what it is.
No.
But it's going to be something random.
Yeah, could be.
You know?
Yeah.
Or some other secret that comes out about him that we haven't been previously shared with. But listen, great to talk to you. William Cleason, thank you very much indeed, leader of the SDP. Let's get Charlie on Starmer.
Hi, Mike. It's far-right Charlie here. Biggest thug going. For goodness sake. When, oh when, is Starmer going to realise that the game is up? He has got to go. He's got to resign and take the whole Labour Party with him. They're an absolute disgrace, trying to defend the indefensible. It's been a catalogue of disasters from the moment he stepped into power up until now. He's on, I believe, minus 45% in the polls, which is just unprecedented now for what, for other prime ministers that we've had. This is just unbelievable, and the man has got to go. I think I speak for pretty much the most of the country. He's going to destroy it otherwise if he does not step down.
Charlie, you're absolutely right, and I think it will happen. I think it will come to pass. I still don't know how, but trust me on this one, I'm not wrong. It's 20 minutes past 9. This is Morning Glory.
It's Plank of the Week with Mike Graham.
Good evening and welcome to Plank of the Week. I'm Mike Graham and this, of course, is Talk. I think he was shocked. You can see the genuine shock.
I was like that.
Sees the boats coming in. Right, let's have the women and children first. He went, oh, just you lads, is it? Yeah.
He's been allowed to develop into this huge sort of problem for the BBC. Yeah. He'd love it, wouldn't he?
He would love it. That's why we're not doing it.
That's why we're not doing it.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
9:23, welcome back to Morning Glory. I'm Mike Graham, and of course we're here until 10 o'clock. Julia Hartley-Brewer will be along very shortly. We're going to bring you a very, very interesting story, an exclusive story, very shortly, involving the cancellation of a teacher. A couple of quick tweets for you, though. Natasha says this: Mike, it's interesting that with most job applications, making hospital appointments, etc., we're always asked for our ethnicity, but it's strangely absent from any of these sexual abuse inquiries. Kevin Ripley in Derbyshire says, morning, Mike, the term far-right really gets my goat. Where were all the far-left remarks by this pathetic Prime Minister when the Hamas sympathisers were constantly parading around London and other areas flying terrorist flags? And one from Teresa, finally. Hi, Mike. Starmer, in his speech yesterday, referred to true facts. Surely facts are facts. And he was the DPP. I am astounded. Absolutely right. Let's talk now to Martin Speake, who's a jazz teacher. He was cancelled, would you believe, by a prestigious music school in this country because of something he said about the system not being racially unequal. He basically said there is no systemic racial inequality in the UK jazz scene. As a result, after being an academic and saxophonist for over 50 years, he's been forced to resign from a place called Trinity Laban, a school well known for providing very, very excellent teaching to young people. Martin joins us now. Now we'll find out exactly what happened. Martin, very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike.
Thanks very much indeed for joining us. I mean, you committed the heinous crime of stating an opinion based on the facts of the matter about racial inequality in the jazz scene. Tell us the story.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a nuanced and long story, but I'll try and keep it brief for you and your listeners. Yeah, I've been teaching at Trinity Laban 22 years, and I'm very involved in jazz education, as you mentioned. Also at other conservatoires. And the principal of Trinity Laban over the last couple of years sent a couple of emails to all staff and all students saying there's systemic inequality and supporting BLM diversity policy, which, as you know, is everywhere. And so, as an experienced jazz musician for 40 years, playing and teaching for a long time, I commented on it. And in fact, he asked for feedback. And I know for a fact I was the only one in the whole place who fed back. So I fed back an email and suggested discussion on this issue. But, you know, an interesting issue in the music scene and nuanced. And I'd never had a reply. And this is nearly a year later. That was the beginning of it. I shared it with one student, an interesting student who we always chatted about all kinds of things. And I thought that's what you're supposed to do in the academic world with young adults, talk about interesting subjects. You know, you don't have to agree. And he shared it with half a dozen students, and one of those got anxious. I don't like what Martin's saying here, and went into the head of jazz, who was a friend of mine for 30 years, interestingly. And instead of calling me in, let's all talk about it, bypassed me, and the wheels of motion were set. And the students then heard about the email, although I hadn't seen it, and decided to boycott my lessons. So I was then not suspended. They didn't call it suspended, but that's a legal term, and would mean they'd have to discipline me, which they couldn't. They hadn't done anything wrong. So they temporarily suspended my classes. This is in March, remember. And it's only now, this is the first time I've been able to speak publicly about it, because there's been a whole legal process going on. And it culminated me in the end of having to resign. They made it so untenable. At the end of, I was on sick leave for 5 months, and then at the beginning of the autumn term, they scheduled my classes as normal, 3 days of classes, but it was 100% boycott by the students. And Trinity Laban supported them on this, rather than supporting me. So I was totally discriminated against. And in the end, they made it untenable. I had to resign. I have to say, I've had incredible support from the Free Speech Union throughout this, morally, financially, and legally, appointing an excellent solicitor. So what's going on now, I have 2 legal cases against them. Discrimination in work, in employment, at the time I was there, and then made it so untenable. I've got constructive dismissal.
That's extraordinary. Well. And were you ever told at any point, you know, this is why? And
No. This is the. I mean, this, you might know this. This goes on forever now. There's no discussion about the issue. at all. And that's what I wanted all along. I'm not even saying I'm right, actually. Yeah. It's not a right or wrong issue. It's just my experience playing music professionally and teaching for 40 years.
Well, I mean, in a teaching environment, surely the ideas are what is important. You're supposed to talk about ideas. You're supposed to have opinions. You're supposed to encourage other people to argue with those opinions. I mean, that's what I remember from going to school, you know?
Exactly, yeah. And we're probably roughly the same age. So in those days, you could talk about anything.
Right.
You didn't have to fall out about it, and you certainly didn't have to be cancelled. That wasn't a word in our culture.
No.
Was it? Cancelled, being cancelled.
Right. And so...
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I mean, we've contacted the Trinity Laban, the Conservatoire of Music and Dance. They haven't come back to us. The London Jazz Orchestra has also been contacted. They haven't come back. It's quite an extraordinary story, really, because at the end of the day, it's one single thing that you've written down, which was written down a long time ago, and here we are, it's still not resolved. I mean, presumably it will take another several months for it to be resolved.
Well, I mean, just on that, I'm going to broaden this out a bit now because we've got a couple of minutes. There's an employment tribunal set for nearly 2 years' time.
Wow.
So all my income has gone.
Yeah.
Because this had a knock-on effect on 2 other conservatoires in London that I teach at,
right.
where they just went in lockstep. Oh, the students are anxious because of your email, which has been circulated online, and the social media storm of that. So the students decide. I mean, the head of music and the head of jazz at Trinity Laban have told me this in a meeting. No, the students decide, they're customers.
That's extraordinary, isn't it? Amazing.
So on one hand, I just want to say something. On one hand, students are considered anxious, so they're like children. They're treated like children. Oh, they're poor little things, they're anxious. On the other hand, they can decide my livelihood. They're mature enough to decide that all my work should be cancelled.
Yeah.
Now, they're young, they're immature, they're undeveloped, and I was at that age. I wouldn't have tried to disrupt someone's life. And further to that, the ramifications of this, as you mentioned, the London Jazz Orchestra, that is a big band that I played in for 15 years, told me to step down.
Right.
As clubs have cancelled gigs, one club even paid me, they paid the band to not go there.
Wow.
They paid the fee to not go, Leicester Jazz House.
No.
It's insanity. It's insanity.
That is mad, isn't it? Completely mad. So, I mean, and presumably you can't just turn up anywhere and get work in another orchestra or another band because the word will be out, presumably.
No, it's not going to happen.
So what do you hope will happen at the end of all of this?
Well, really, I want huge compensation and a public apology.
Yeah.
For doing nothing wrong.
Right.
I'm bringing up a subject that might be a challenging subject for people to talk about.
Right. But it shouldn't be, though.
No. Race and jazz.
I mean, your contention was basically that black musicians are not underrepresented in the UK, but actually they have far more opportunities than many other people, which doesn't seem to me to be a particularly controversial view.
I think that's the case now. You know, festivals say, can you have a black musician in your band?
Yeah.
You know? They literally say that.
Right.
You can go on websites of festivals that, you know, all in the so-called idea of diversity, which, by the way, I think is a very shallow way of talking about diversity. Skin colour, pigmentation of skin. I'll give you an example. First, for instance, Trinity Laban, you could have, say you have 50% women, 50% black people there as staff and students, but they're all from the south of England and they're all middle class.
Yeah.
That is not diversity.
No. Well, it's like I say the same about the BBC. You know, the BBC has got plenty of people with different skin colours working there, but they're all middle class. They've all been to the same schools. They're not diverse at all.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Right. Well, listen, I wish you well, because it seems incredibly unfair, Martin. And if you've got the Free Speech Union behind you, though, you've got the best of the bunch there. You've got good help. So hopefully they'll get you over the line and your life can return to normal at some point.
Been excellent, I have to say that, and just maybe you could say there is a crowdfunder to help with my legal fees, because this would be 2 years long, but I don't know how I'm going to get any work back.
Yeah, right.
Spread the word.
Yeah, we'll do.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Not at all. Not at all. We'll see if we can get some people to book you for some private sessions or something like that. Bit of music teaching. We can see what we can do. Great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. That's Martin Speak there, who's been treated abominably by a place that he worked for decades and by people that he's known for decades. Trinity Laban Conservatoire of Music and Dance is the place. We asked them for a comment. We're waiting to hear from them. They haven't said anything. Similarly, London Jazz Orchestra have also been contacted. They haven't said anything either. We'll bring you details on that as we get them, as we update the story throughout the course of the day. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 9:36. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until 10, of course. Julie Hartley-Brewer will be here as well just before that to tell us what's going on. Stuart says this: Yvette Cooper has got it completely wrong. The problem wasn't lack of reporting, but after reporting, all the authorities covering it up, from the police to the CPS to the politicians to the councils and more. And Shirley from Leon C says, how dare he accuse the British public of being far right? That's the thing. Keir Starmer has made yet another blunder. Let's get a voice note from Mick.
Good morning, Mike. Great show as usual. Mick from Huddersfield. Prior to being elected, Keir Starmer said there would be a government of service. All they've done is gone back on all their promises, and now they're calling anyone who's concerned about kiddies getting raped and groomed as far right. Absolutely disgraceful.
It really is, and it shows you just how tone-deaf not only Keir Starmer is, but how the entire Labour movement is. The whole Labour government just doesn't get it. David in Cheshire says, Mike, we do not have a race problem, we have a culture problem. As a nation, we are one of the most accepting of any race and colour, but we should not be accepting or tolerate any barbaric medieval culture wanting to replace our own. It's time to be honest, but can Keir or Labour handle honesty? Well, they're not very good with honesty, are they? They're not really good with that at all. They don't like the truth, they don't like transparency, they talk about it, but they don't actually practice it. And that, I'm afraid, is the problem. Let's talk to James Esses, though, psychotherapist and founder of Just Therapy, because the story that came across our desk earlier today is about an extraordinary situation, a bit similar to the last story we did about the cancellation of a music teacher. This is about somebody who was a member of the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists, in fact the head of a speech and language therapy group. He's been forced to issue a grovelling apology following a 5-month investigation at the organisation because he dared to follow somebody on Twitter, or X, that he shouldn't have done, right? So not only did he not post anything that was upsetting to anyone, not only did he not say anything that was upsetting to anybody, not only did he not send any letters to anybody that were upsetting, he simply clicked on follow on an account that was deemed to be so heinous that he had to be suspended. And the account, of course, belonged to Tommy Robinson. Let's talk to James Esses and find out what's it all about. James, very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike.
So, yet again, we are incredibly surprised to hear that people actually do this stuff in real life. You know, you imagine that working in some of these organisations is pretty weird and strange because the people are always, apologising for things and being anxious about other things. But here's a guy whose career practically disappeared after an embarrister was instructed to look into what he was doing.
Yeah, I mean, I've spent years exposing infringement of free speech and the cancel culture that's taken over society. And this is one of the worst I've come across. In fact, Elon Musk, reposting what I put out, called it insane. Yeah. And that's exactly what it is. It sets such a dangerous precedent here. The suggestion that merely following someone on a social media platform is akin to endorsing them. I mean, people follow all sorts of people for all sorts of reasons, primarily to keep up to date with what's going on around the world and in news. I mean, for example, if Keir Starmer was to follow some foreign dictator, should he be ousted out of the Premiership for endorsing them? I mean, the whole thing is crazy.
Well, exactly right. And I remember finding, and this was, I think, before Elon Musk actually bought X, so I'm not sure if they still are on it, but the Taliban had an account when Donald Trump wasn't allowed to have one. And you thought to yourself, hang on a minute, that's a bit weird, but I can follow the Taliban, but apparently you can't follow Tommy Robinson.
Well, I mean, that makes the point precisely. But, I did some digging into this group of therapists within the organisation who kind of launched this mob attack. They call themselves the Anti-Racism Action Collective. I drilled down into some of the members of this collective. Of course, a number of them have got pronouns after their signatures. Some of them even have purple and blue hair, which I think is quite telling. But, the way in which this was conducted and the amount of money that was spent on this. And, a lot of these therapists will be working for the NHS, and we know what waiting lists are like there at the moment for people to see therapists. And the fact that they're spending their time and money on a 5-month investigation into this, I think is an absolute disgrace. I feel very sorry for the CEO for being dragged through this, but, at the same time, I don't have a huge amount of respect for the man either. Why? Because he's come out with his grovelling apology. Yes. And actually, he originally tried to make a claim that he must have been hacked because he couldn't have possibly be following Tommy Robinson. So I'd much rather he come out and say, you know what, I followed him, I wanted to see what he was saying.
Right. For which there's nothing to be ashamed of at all. I mean, as you say, people do it all the time. I'm sure, I haven't even checked, I'm sure there are people I follow that I don't actually necessarily agree with everything they say. I follow them because I want to see what they're saying. That's the whole point of communication and freedom of speech, isn't it? I mean, but his grovelling apology, as you say, was this: I am deeply sorry for the hurt, upset, distress, fear and anger that this has caused members, colleagues and staff. Well, that's ridiculous. How has it caused them anger and distress, for heaven's sake?
Well, this is the problem. We've got activists masquerading as therapists. And again, it's the clients that are meant to be the vulnerable ones. But actually, we're finding increasingly in this country, it's the practitioners who themselves are completely fragile. But this CEO, in grovelling in the way he has essentially thrown more junior members of staff under the bus because if the same thing ever to happen to them, they would have no choice but to apologise.
Yeah, right.
And actually, the mob that came for him weren't just calling for an apology originally. They were calling for him to resign over this.
Right. And what does it say about the practice of therapy as well? Because, I mean, I would not have confidence going to see a therapist who I thought was going to be judging me on my political output or on my political thought process. If I was going to see a therapist with some personal problem and that whoever it is going to be so woke that they're going to be distressed by something that you might tell them, where does that leave us?
Well, I'm sad to say, Mike, that the world of therapy in this country has been completely taken over by dangerous ideologies, identity politics, fragility, and a complete infringement of free speech. That's why I've set up this group called Just Therapy, which is trying to offer an avenue for members of the public to find essentially non-woke therapists, because they are increasingly hard to come by these days. But I mean, if we can't trust therapists who are meant to be experts in mental health and psychology of the human mind to be a bit resilient, who can we trust?
Well, quite. And also, could you trust them, as I say, not to report you to somebody for something that you might tell them?
Well, I've spent the last few years, Mike, myself fighting litigation. I was expelled from a master's degree in psychotherapy because I spoke out against young children being sterilised and mutilated in the name of gender ideology. So I've witnessed firsthand the way in which they'll come down on you like a ton of bricks if you don't go along with the establishment narrative. It's really quite worrying times. I don't really know what to say, but to members of the public listening, there are avenues to find sane therapists. There are some of us that still exist out there, if only a handful.
Well, thank goodness for that. And presumably this guy, Steve Jameson, who's managed to save his job as a result of all of this madness, will probably not be there for the long haul, will he? Because they'll probably find some other way of getting him.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised. He's deleted his account on X completely. He seems to have gone under the radar. Steve, if you're listening, please man up.
Yes.
Okay, you need to set a good example for your staff members. You did absolutely nothing wrong. We need to stop this collective mob baying across society. And I think, I really hope, to be honest, actually, the one thing I would say, Mike, is that I've been pleased by the response to this, because even those on my social media accounts who despise Tommy Robinson by their own account have come out in support of this individual, the CEO, and they've said that nobody should be cancelled for following somebody else. So I think, the desire for free speech, I hope, will win out ultimately.
Well, you'd like to think so. I'm just looking down my list of people that I follow, and I didn't know there were so many evil people on there. Keir Starmer, for example, I follow, which I'm slightly sort of bemused to have to admit. Hen Mazig, who's an author of a book called The Wrong Kind of Jew. Gareth Davis, MP, I follow him as well. Sebastian Payne, leader writer at The Times. I mean, the list goes on and on. It's a right rogues gallery, this, of people that I follow.
Well, I follow you, Mike, so I'm expecting
well, listen,
to be cancelled.
You're in real trouble now. That's absolutely right. Listen, good to talk to you, James. Keep up the fight. We need more people like you, I think, on board. Thank you very much indeed. James Essie's their psychotherapist and founder of Just Therapy. What does the world come to when therapists are now so woke that they're criticising each other for following the wrong people on Twitter or X? I mean, what if you follow Elon Musk? Is that going to render your job absolutely and utterly untenable? Let's talk to Chris, who's in Cambridgeshire. Hello, Chris.
Hello, Mike.
How are you doing?
No, well, put it this way, I'm still here.
Good man. Hang it in there.
Problems.
Yeah, absolutely right. What do you want to tell me?
Well, no, I was saying earlier, the one problem that we are all suffering from at the moment, we have a little man with a very big ambition and absolutely no conscience.
Yeah.
He doesn't care if anything gets in his way, how much he hurts it, how much he damages it. And the worst part of it is when you get someone like that, before they're stopped, they do an incredible amount of harm.
Yes, because he can't see that he's doing harm, can he? He's like all of these evangelists.
It doesn't matter.
He thinks he's doing something good,
Yeah, he doesn't care. It's not what he wants. All he's interested in is what he wants.
Yeah.
Anything else is just chaff.
Yeah, it's true. And he is a zealot. There's no question. You can see it in his eyes, He doesn't really care about human beings. He cares about the project,
It's the dream.
Yes. It is awful. Dreadful.
It's that thing that's right out in space somewhere.
Right.
No one else can see.
Yeah. Totally.
But there we are.
Totally agree. Chris, you've nailed it. Well, we don't have to live with it. We can try and get rid of him, which I think we can do if we keep up the pressure, because I think pretty soon the pressure is going to get so much that he won't be able to bear it. How about this from somebody called Michelle in Altrincham? Good morning, Mike. You brightened my morning. You touched on this last year that Starmer would be out. What do you know, Mike? Tell us. I've had some bet that he will be out by the end of 2025. Well, I think your bet is a good one. I think your bet is probably safe. I haven't got any particular news for you on that front. I just have a feeling. And usually my instincts on these things are correct. Jeff in Dordrecht, EC1, that's a good Scottish word. He says, can we blame Starmer for this awful weather? Very possibly. And how about this from somebody who doesn't give a name? Stephen Kinnock, in an interview with Victoria Derbyshire last night, incredibly questioned why anyone would possibly want an inquiry into mass child rape gangs. He couldn't work it out why, as a country, we have to put a stop to it and find those capable of facilitating it for decades accountable. So ridiculously out of touch. Well, that's Labour for you. And Steve says, for the last 3 decades, our politicians have assumed that migrants from all over the world with different cultures, beliefs and behaviours will simply integrate and become British. Wrong. Let's get a voice note from Steve.
Just like to ask, where are the so-called community leaders, all these Muslim community leaders that appear when there's a riot that the police liaise with? Nowhere to be seen. What are the Muslim politicians saying about the rape scandal?
Yeah, absolutely right. Ian in Newark says this: you've just sympathetically interviewed a music teacher who has been cancelled and lost his livelihood and is relying on crowdfunding to help pay his legal fees, and you then criticise a man who's apologised in order not to get cancelled and save his livelihood. Make your mind up. Well, there's no duality about that, Ian. It's both the same thing. The point about apologising for something that you haven't done wrong is that you then feed into the menace and the madness of the woke culture. He hasn't apologised, the teacher, the music teacher, and he is therefore fighting for his job, and he's fighting for compensation because something was done to him which was entirely unjust. And you don't sort out injustice by giving into it and apologising for something you haven't done wrong. So that's why I would criticise the man who apologised. It's the same thing, Ian, in Newark. I hope that sorts you out. It's 9:49, very nearly 10 minutes to 10, and we'll be back after this.
Saturday night, and you lucky people have got four of Talk's mightiest personalities in one room. I mean, what could go right? Me, Jeremy Kyle, Michael Graham, Julia, I'm Not Grumpy Tonight, Hartley Brewer and Kev O'Sullivan. Have you seen this?
Yeah.
What are you thinking? Jules is smiling.
I think they've made us all look a lot better than we actually look.
Well, I know what to ask for next time I go to the hairdresser.
I'd like to talk about Jez's nipples on his...
You got nipples? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got nipples.
I didn't think you had nipples. I assumed you just came in an egg.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. I'm Mike Graham, 9:52. Julie Hartley-Brewer will be here in just a few moments' time, about 6 or 7 minutes. Chris in Newbury says this: Mike, I wonder why a Labour minister doesn't want a statutory inquiry into rape gangs. Rotherham, Labour run. Rochdale, Labour run. Telford, Labour run. Oxford, Labour run. Oldham, Labour run. Yeah, interesting that, isn't it? Let's get a voice note from Mark.
Hi, Mike. This is Mark in Liverpool. Listening to that music teacher's story about how he
got suspended or didn't get suspended, but was basically made to feel so unwelcome he had to resign. That's no different from Stasi, East German police systems, no different from deep communist systems throughout the world. That is what it's become now on the liberal left, and thank God we're all waking up to it, and hopefully when Trump gets into power, the whole world's going to see a shift towards the right now, but not the far right, but the right.
Well, this is the thing. This is why I keep saying that this is not only the home of common sense here at Talk, but this will be the year of common sense. And it has kicked off rather well. Don't forget, we have got Donald Trump coming in as president. We've also seen the demise of Justin Trudeau, who spoke to his family over dinner to say that he was leaving because he can't do the job anymore. What an absolute wally. This from Gary. Keir Starmer is so predictable, says Gary in Shrewsbury. To cover his own backside and the mistakes he's made, he just calls everything far right. What a joke this man is, and it's quite chilling that this man is our Prime Minister. It really is. Earlier on, we spoke to former Detective Constable at Greater Manchester Police, Maggie Oliver, who, of course, knows inside out the stories of the grooming gangs and the rape gangs in various different parts of Britain, where terrible things have happened. She gave us her reaction to being labelled far right by Keir Starmer for speaking up and speaking out against the Pakistani grooming gangs. It was Keir Starmer, after all, yesterday, who referred specifically to politicians jumping on a far-right bandwagon.
Yeah, I mean, not only myself, but many of the victims and survivors that we support in the Maggie Oliver Foundation are raging about that comment. I am not a far-right extremist. You know, I'm a woman who served 16 years in the police, and I have put my life on the line to help amplify the voices of those victims who have been failed. The Home Office, in his time, in 2008, sent out a circular to all police forces saying that these grooming gangs, that this kind of abuse, the children were making, they were complicit in their abuse, that they were presenting. Now, that sent out a clear message that we do not attack this kind of abuse. And for me, that is unforgivable. I have said that I want to see at least one senior police officer, a chief constable, and I've got a few in my mind who I would like to see charged with gross criminal neglect, criminal charges, misconduct in malfeasance in a public office. They knew what was going on. They closed down these cases. They abandoned the children, and they are criminally liable, in my opinion. I really believe that if we had a prosecution of a senior public official, we would get change overnight, because every other public official in office now would not want to be in that same position.
You're absolutely right. Maggie Oliver, a very, very fine woman indeed. She's been on this show very many times. She's been on Talk an awful lot as well. She was on with Julia yesterday. But she's absolutely right to say, when I asked her, what should Keir Starmer do? She said, just do your job and actually have a proper inquiry, not the one that's 2 years old, not the one that she was stopped from speaking at for any length of time and having 2/3 of her statement taken out of the actual report itself. Let's go revisit it, though, back to Keir Starmer. Yesterday, while he was speaking, we spotted a woman who was standing just over his left shoulder, and she seemed to be having trouble with her nose. She was rubbing it, she was picking it, she put her finger up it. At one point, she stuck her finger into her mouth. At another point, she rubbed her hair. This is a woman who works for the NHS. Quite a few of you noticed it as well, and many of you have sent me messages. One here from Linda, who says, "Morning, Mike. Perhaps the nose-picking nurse adjacent to Starmer was making a silent protest. He was getting right up her nose." Sharon says, "This disgusting woman that is playing up her nose, putting it into her mouth, she works for the NHS. No wonder we have so many infections in the NHS." And one from Sarah, who says she's supposed to be a nurse. Perhaps Labour should reassign some of that DEI budget to teach NHS staff some basic hygiene. Well, you would think, wouldn't you? It's pretty awful. Absolutely ridiculous. A couple more of you have got things to say about the rape and grooming story. Mike says, Elaine from Bracknell, "I think this proves that the inquiry into the rape and the grooming gangs should be an independent one, as our establishment cannot be trusted." And one from Stork, who says, "Mike, where are all the imams calling for an inquiry?" Interesting. I haven't heard any of them doing that, but maybe we just haven't been told. They like to keep these things secret, don't they, inside the Labour Party? Julie Hartley-Brewer's here. Very good morning.
A very good morning to you.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, I mean, it's still all going off, isn't it? This war of words.
Far right.
I think Keir Starmer thought he was going to kill it all off, and Elon Musk has just kept coming back. And we've got Kemi Badenoch criticising what Keir Starmer had to say, calling smear tactics. This whole. But again, this is exactly why people didn't tackle the grooming gangs in the first place. Oh, it's a far right bandwagon. It's not. I'm still in two minds on the independent inquiry. But if people like Maggie Oliver, I know you've spoken to her, I spoke to her yesterday, if they believe that it is necessary, and the original one, we've had one.
Yes.
Yeah, but they did 10 days.
Yes.
They did
having
10
looked at
days
the
on
original one
gangs.
and having looked at what they didn't do in that inquiry...
They didn't even talk to people like Maggie Oliver.
They didn't mention Telford. They mentioned the word Pakistani once.
They deliberately didn't look at where there had been grooming gangs. They said, well, that's already been done. Clearly something needs to be done.
Yes.
Robert Jenrick has come out fighting, Shadow Justice Secretary today. He's basically